He made many political enemies, but I am proud to say that although diametrically opposed in politics, Bish and I could always enjoy a well-tempered argument, especially over a good pint. I'm also saddened to report on the death of Mr. Mark Putin following a short period of illness. Mark was a serving member of both the Council's independent school admission appeals panels and the independent remuneration panel, having been heavily involved with the recent review of councillors' allowances. He was also a school governor at the Bemrose School. Prior to his retirement, Mark enjoyed a distinguished career in education, having taught for 39 years in Derby, 25 of which was spent as head teacher of St Albans Catholic Primary School in Chaddesden. It was there that I got to know Mark, as when I served as a school governor some years ago. I've written to Mark's wife, expressing our sincere condolences, recognising his life of public service and the many hours he volunteered to the work of this council. Is there anybody who would like to add something on either of those?
Mr. Mayor, I was sorry to hear of the death of Mark after a short but cruelly terminal illness. He was for many years a well-loved and respected head teacher at St Albans Catholic Primary in Chaddesden and well known with affection across the Catholic community in Derby. He lost his first wife, Helen, in 2012, and Mark, along with their children Stephen, Kevin and Louise, were devastated at her loss. After some years as a widower, he met and married Claire, who survives him. They found great happiness together, and I offer Claire, Stephen, Kevin and Louise our deepest sympathy. After retiring from teaching, Mark became involved in quite a number of activities, such as being a member of the school's admissions appeals panel and was a valued governor at Bemrose School. I believe he also volunteered with the National Trust at Cork Abbey. On a lighter side, after retirement, Mark became associated with a group of largely, but not exclusively, composed of retired teachers who called themselves, completely accurately as it happens, the Old Gits. They planned an annual trip abroad to various places during which they would take some interest in the cultural merits of the location, but this aspect was squeezed by the amount of time and money spent sampling the local beers. The group would meet on a weekly basis after the trip at the Old Dolphin and both reminisce about previous trips and plan the next one. Prague was a particular favourite. Former pupils of St Albans and their parents during the period of Mark's headship will have been saddened to hear of his death. The vocation to teach requires steadfast commitment and compassion, and the head teacher's task is to bring out the best in everyone connected to the school: pupils, staff, governors and parents. Mark lived out his faith through his vocation to teach, and many, many Derby citizens benefited from their knowing him. He was one of the good guys. May he rest in peace.
Thank you, Councillor Hazelgrave. Councillor Hussain.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to say a few words. First of all, I'm very sad to hear that Bish has passed away. I didn't actually know till you announced it here, but I knew him very well. I mean, back in the 80s, we spent a lot of time together, and he will be remembered for his campaigning zeal. First of all, he was ardent socialist. I've never seen anybody on the left as left as Bish was. It was totally uncompromising. And I think until his very old age, he believed in dictatorship of the working classes. Now, you know, it's not the stance that many people actually take nowadays, but he did not compromise on that when he says, well, that's what I believe in, and that's what I fight for. In terms of the value base that he had, when he was the employment officer at Derby REC, many, many people back in the 80s who had employment-related issues with their employers, he backed them to the hill. And he usually was so dedicated and he worked hard and usually won the cases. There was no shortage of people who were queuing up to tap into his expertise in that particular area, and he really genuinely enjoyed it. He was also really dedicated anti-apartheid worker, and I went out on many outings with him outside supermarkets, various other events, although sometimes there was only 3 or 4 of us or 5 of us. But we spent the day because we believed in that cause, and nobody believed it more staunchly than Bish did. I'm sad to hear that he's no longer with us. He may rest in peace. Thank you.
Any other speakers? You say that Bish was an ardent socialist. That may well be so. But when somebody accused him of selling the socialist worker in East Street once, he said, "I've never sold a socialist worker." That doesn't mean he wasn't trying to, but now he's gone, we shall never find out. So perhaps we'd take a minute of silence. Thank you. Item 5 is statements from members of the Council Cabinet, and no statements have been received. Thank you. Item 6 is questions from members of the public. These are from members of the public to Cabinet members and committee chairs. We've received 15 in total, where a written response has already been provided in the booklet, where we'll hear a summary of the question from an officer before inviting each member of the public to ask their supplementary question. So, start then with question A, and Alex, would you like to summarise it?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question A is from Patrick Harting. I don't believe Mr. Harting is in the chamber this evening, but for the record, his question was, what progress has been made developing the D2N2 local cycling and walking infrastructure plan? What are Derby's plans for public consultation in terms of scope and timing?
Thank you. Next one is Lucy Giuliano.
I don't believe Ms. Giuliano's here at the moment either, but again, for the record, the question was, why did the council not apply for tranche 3 of the government's active travel fund to enable and prioritise walking and cycling?
We know Simon Bacon's here, otherwise it wouldn't be a proper council meeting, would it? Would you like to summarise his question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Simon's question is, when will the council be addressing bins left on streets, which cause issues accessing pavements and increased risk of contamination?
I'm sure you have a supplementary, Mr. Bacon.
I do, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. If you're going to target areas in my community, which is Normanton Ward, can you share the streets in question with myself and also separately with Normanton Neighbourhood Board, of which I'm part? Thank you.
Simon, by all means, I've got a meeting with the Director of Street Pride on Friday, so I will bring your comments up with her. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Wright's question is, when will Derby City Council require its representatives on the Derby and Derbyshire Pensions Committee to support divestment of pension funds from companies which promote the use of fossil fuels?
Have you a supplementary, Cecile?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. Thank you. Fields, houses, forest are ablaze across Europe. We thank our skilled and courageous firefighters, dozens of whom ended up in hospital yesterday. Fossil fuel use is the main cause of global warming. Doing nothing is not an option. When will the council come out for divestment from fossil fuel companies? Thank you.
Councillor Barker.
Yes, thank you for the supplementary, Mrs. Wright. I think the last paragraph of the written explanation says it all. As a responsible long-term investor, Derbyshire Pension Fund is in a good position to provide support to companies right across the economy during energy transition. Influencing corporate behaviour through engagement achieves real-world reductions in greenhouse gas and emissions. That's the policy of the pension scheme, and will continue to be so.
Question E from Pauline Inwood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Inwood's question is, has the report and recommendations of the Climate Change Committee been considered in Derby? What are the Council's processes for measuring and reporting on emissions, and will the Council consider recommendations to reduce car demand by not supporting road building projects?
Do you have a supplementary, Ms. Inwood?
Yes, I do. The last few weeks of heat and wildfires across Europe are an indication, among many others, that business as usual will not be sufficient to avoid even further global warming. Surely local government should not be waiting for central government direction to develop appropriate actions quickly in line with expert advice. When will you start to do this? One example being to oppose the massive A38 expansion project.
Thank you, Pauline. Yeah, I think we've discussed this before. It's a very contentious issue, and as I've previously explained, it is a project that is outside of our control, but it is important to add that roads are used by all sorts of transport, just not wet, including wet vehicle transport. So things such as public transport, electric vehicles, cycles, all the rest of it use our roads. So it's important to have the right infrastructure. So I'm afraid if you wanted me to stand here and oppose it, I won't.
Question from Brendan Connolly.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Connolly's question is, why did the Council raise council tax to the maximum amount in April 2021 when it has since reported an underspend for the previous year?
Mr. Connolly, do you have a supplementary?
I do, Mr. Mayor.
Like to put it? Thank you.
Why, when you promised to keep council tax increases to a minimum, have you always tried to increase them to the maximum legal amount? How can the electorate of Derby trust you Tories?
Councillor Smale.
Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Connolly. It will always be this administration's promise to keep them as low as possible, but we do have significant pressures and costs that come our way. Obviously, when we do set our budgets, they're a snapshot in current time, and we do procure pressures in the year, but we do have a diligent team that's working very hard to help bring some of these pressures down. But we'll always make that promise that there is no intention from this administration to obviously put our council tax up to the maximum. You can have my word that we'll always be looking to reduce our pressures and to maximise efficiency for our residents in Derby. Thank you.
Okay, next question from Ruth Coates.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ruth Coates' question to Councillor Hassel is, what is the Council doing to restore bus services operated by Trent Barton in several areas of the city?
Ruth Coates, do you have a supplementary?
Yes, is that on? Yes, I do. I realise funding is always going to be an issue. However, given the wake-up call we've had this week in the form of devastating fires, it should be obvious that doing nothing and having to deal with crisis management will ultimately work out far more costly than addressing the cause of the problem in the first place. Getting people out of their cars and onto public transport is one way to do this, and I'm afraid Trent Barton's arguments against it just don't stack up. Why can't the council look at taking buses under council control, starting with those services that Trent Barton are unable or unwilling to provide?
Councillor Hassel.
you, Ruth. I believe there's a motion on this later on, so it might be worth you hanging around to listen to the debate. So I'm sure it'll be answered during that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Question from Claire Wood.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Claire Wood's question to Councillor Pearce is, what has been the reduction in the use of harmful pesticides following the council resolution passed last year, and when does the council plan to stop using these harmful chemicals?
Do you have a supplementary, Ms Wood?
Yes, I do. The motion was passed last May to stop the routine use of pesticides, such as glyphosate, where possible. Some councils are banning the use of glyphosate completely. Does Derby plan to do this?
Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Claire. Sorry about that, I was just looking down my list. Yes, there is a gradual reduction in this. You did ask for the percentage reduction on that. The teams are now using weed killers with low content glyphosate. Overall, the amount of glyphosate used this year has decreased by approximately 25% from previous years. So as you can see, we are gradually coming down, and I will have a word with the grounds maintenance team to see when it is possible to not use them. Thank you.
Question from Sassy Stark.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Ms Stark's question to Councillor Hassel is, does the council have plans to introduce an Article 4 instruction under relevant planning legislation? When will this be discussed fully, and how soon can it be implemented?
Do you have a supplementary, Ms Stark?
Yes. I feel like the answer wasn't really specific. It didn't address what I actually asked. The petition that I started just over 2 weeks ago now has over 500 signatures, which is pretty substantial considering it's not a mainstream issue, it's just a local issue. At the weekend, Struts Park Residential Association had their own protest when one of their local residents sold a house to his own company after converting it to a HMO, knowing that it would get approval. He made £150,000 by selling it to himself, which is obviously it means he didn't pay capital gains tax either. He then, at the weekend, did a presentation at Pride Park where he charged £400 per person to show them how to invest in HMOs, and he called it a gold mine, and then walked those people around the golden area, Struts Park.
I have to press you to ask a question, please.
Yes, I will get to it. I'm sorry.
Very quickly, I hope.
Yes. So the residents had to put notices up in their windows as protest against the one resident. My question is, please can my question be answered, the actual question that I asked?
Councillor Hassel.
Thank you. Having sat on the planning committee for some years, I understand the contentious issue of HIMOs. And Article 4 is somewhat of a sledgehammer for this issue. And while I absolutely can agree with how residents feel on HIMOs, we deal with it at planning committee every time a meeting comes up. However, it would be remiss of me to kind of blindly enact this process, fully knowing that the ultimate say and decision is held by the Secretary of State, who will demand that we demonstrate harm. So without the evidence and demonstrable harm, we cannot enact an Article 4. If that can be arranged and suitable evidence can be found, please bring it to us and we'll talk. Thank you.
Back to Simon Bacon.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Simon's question is, what progress has been made in preparing the council's new waste strategy, and how will the public be engaged with the process?
Supplementary, Bacon?
I have got a supplementary question, Mr Mayor, yes. It's funny that, isn't it? The current strategy clearly doesn't work, as recycling rates reported to Cabinet recently indicated an expected recycling rate of 38%. This compares to a high of 48% a number of years ago. So while you are committed to recycling more, Councillor Pearce, how will you make that happen in a future strategy when you fail now?
Councillor Pearce.
Thanks, Simon. I was expecting that one. It's a slight increase from the previous year, Simon, the 38.7. It's gone up from 36.1. So we're on the up again after coming out of COVID, and we will make sure that that will rise and rise and rise. Thank you.
Next one is another from Pauline Inwood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Pauline's question is, please can the Cabinet member explain how the Council decided to spend £150,000 of climate change funding on the Forest for the Future project, and what alternatives were considered?
Have you got a supplementary, Pauline?
Yes, I do. Thank you. Thank you for this reply explaining how this very large expenditure came about. As the project is now underway, please could you at least reconsider where the trees are relocated when moved from the marketplace? As our city parks are generally well provided with trees and happily restocked by Trees for Derby and the Parks Department, would it not be better to green up some of our many city streets which are lacking in trees?
Councillor Pearce.
Thanks, Pauline. Very good question. A lot of the parks are without a lot of the trees as well. The difficulty in putting trees on streets is obviously the infrastructure that's underneath those streets. We can of course talk to our trees department and see if there are any areas on any of the streets in the city where we can put these, because same as you, I think they look great in the city centre. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question, another from Brendan Colley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Connolly's question is attending council cabinet meetings an expectation of group leaders in receipt of a special responsibility allowance?
Would you like to put a supplementary to that?
Yes, please, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, can I first say that could we all wish the Lionesses good luck tonight in their quarter-final against Spain? Mr. Mayor.
I don't think that's supplementary or a question, but yes, the sentiment is well
Mr. Mayor, so figures I have seen show Alan Graves Senior of UKIP Reform, or whatever the name is this week, in the last municipal year attended just 5 of the possible 12 meetings. Do you agree that that's a scandal, and what do you plan to do about it?
Councillor Barker.
Mr. Mayor, I would have to ask legal advice on whether or not I could discuss a member that isn't present here in this council chamber.
Do you want to advise? Emily's advice is perfectly acceptable. It's in the public domain.
I forgot what the question was now. Do I think it's acceptable? I suppose the answer, if I'm being totally honest, is no.
Thank you. Another from Ruth Coates on Alex will tell us.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ruth Coates' question to Councillor Pearce is, why hasn't the council considered the adoption of dual-purpose general waste and recycling bins in the city centre?
Ruth Coates, do you have a supplementary?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I'm actually pleased to see that it is being considered. That's very hopeful. But dare I hope that we'll get them within months rather than years, as stated in the answer.
Councillor Pearce.
Ruth, the answer does say we already have got some of these dual bins either in the city centre or around the city itself in different wards. I know there's quite a few wards in my ward in Chaddesden that's got at least 3 or 4 of these dual bins. So yes, the numbers will increase as we replace the older bins. Thank you.
And Claire Wood's question?
Yes, Claire Wood's question to Councillor Hassel is, when will Derby City Council start giving advice to citizens about behavioural changes needed in response to the climate emergency?
Do you have a supplementary, Ms Woods?
Yes, I do, yes.
Oh, yeah.
The planet is in serious trouble, as we've seen this weekend. The council produced signage on traffic islands and its website giving COVID advice. Why isn't it doing similar for the climate emergency, given that the emergency was declared over 3 years ago?
Councillor Hassel.
Thank you very much. As you'll know, since I've been in post just over 6 months or more, we have enacted our climate action plan for the council, and we are now on with procuring our city strategy. Hopefully, this will be a crucial piece of work for the city, and it will help advise and guide as you have asked. Obviously, it's not something that can be rushed. I know that we are all impatient for its development, but as soon as it is possible to get that through, we will get it enacted. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last one is from Sassy Stark.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The final question to Councillor Hassel is what action is being taken to ensure that owners and landlords preserve the external characteristics of heritage properties?
Do you have a supplementary, Sassy?
I do. I was mainly referring to residential properties, although maybe I didn't specifically say that. So it wasn't answered for residential properties. This kind of ties in with my other question, because looking at the detrimental effect of high concentrations of HMOs is evident on streets like Hartington Street, where some landlords have even rendered the fronts of their properties without enforcement action being taken. They've also put up satellite dishes all over the place, and it's doesn't look like a heritage area. And what I'm asking is what enforcement will be taken to the landlords who have those properties, some of which have probably never been to Derby and only have it as an investment property.
Councillor Hassel?
Yeah, thank you. I absolutely agree. We have got some unscrupulous landlords out there, albeit it is their responsibility to act accordingly. We would all hope that they would act responsibly and take care of the city as we all would like them to. But yes, I do agree we need to start some more heavy-handed, let's be brutal, enforcement action and get our city looking as it should. So thank you.
I think we need to be really heavy-handed on the one with the rendered front, because the landlord happens to be, I believe, Derby City Council. Okay, I think we inherited it like that. Questions relating to the Derbyshire Fire Authority and Derby Homes, I understand none have been received. We move on then to the questions from non-council cabinet members. 30 have been received, although some have been grouped together as they're of similar topics. The first one is from Councillor A.W. Graves.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Graves Senior's question is, please can the Cabinet Member explain why refunds to residents who had purchased swimming lessons that did not take place have been refunded by cheque? Councillor Graves isn't here, of course, this evening. He's provided his apologies.
Right, so we go on to one from Councillor Prosser.
Councillor Prosser's question to Councillor Smale is, what is being done to resolve issues being faced by residents attempting to contact the council and access services?
Councillor Prosser, do you have a supplementary?
I do, yeah. So obviously there was a rise, as you've said, but that still doesn't explain, for instance, today why a third of calls into various departments went unanswered. A third is a very high number. So what are we going to do about unanswered calls to the centre? And our digital offering isn't slick enough, so that's adding pressure to the call centre as well. So what are we doing about that?
Councillor Smale.
Thank you very much, Councillor Prosser. I think it sounds like a good opportunity for us to get together with our Director for Digital Services to go through and iron through some of these problems. I think we all agree that the way that we communicate with our residents has changed significantly in the last 12 to 18 months. And obviously, as a council, we're looking to try and adapt, re-improvise, and also get the information out to the public in how we can connect and contact each other. So I think this is a good opportunity for us to get together and look at some of the strategy that involves the digital agenda, which is being adapted right now, and I think it would be quite helpful if you also had that input into it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, the next question is from Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Martin's question to Councillor Webb is, what is the Cabinet Member doing to address high levels of health inequality that have been accentuated by the pandemic?
Supplementary, Alison?
I do, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much. Thank you for the answer to the question. I do appreciate the work to develop a health inequalities strategy and also the work of the Health Inequalities Partnership. Will the Cabinet member ensure that some key improvement targets to improve health outcomes are set in place at the earliest opportunity? Thank you.
Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Martin. Yes, there are conversations and duties being looked at with regard to our integrated care system and our links with health and well-being and public health, and all of these conversations include health inequalities. So we are trying to raise the level of health within the city. Work has been done with Live Well, with Move More Derby, with our Health Inequalities Forum. So things are moving, not as quickly as I would like, but they are moving in the right direction. Now that we have integrated health and social care, then I'm hoping that movement will be quicker. You are aware that the integrated care partnership has only just been formally established, and terms of reference are being agreed at the moment that include health inequalities as part of that.
Next one is from Councillor Skelton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Skelton's question is, what initial plans have been made for Alistry Hall and Golf Course now that the sale of the hall has fallen through?
Councillor Skelton, do you have a supplementary?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So bearing in mind that the council's duty to get best value for its assets, and as you're not being prescriptive over the future use or mix of uses for the site, will you now implement the motion that was passed exactly 1 year ago in this chamber, well, not in this chamber, in the on the marketplace, namely to ask Marketing Derby to identify suitable organisations who are interested, who would be interested in operating the site and the hall? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Smell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for your question, Councillor Skelton. I think I've answered the question you've already put through, and all options are on the table. And if that means having discussions with Marketing Derby, then so be it. But there is so much more to this hall than just the current of just selling it. Obviously, clearly stated that there's an opportunity for education provision. So, for me to comment or predetermine on what the next phase of this Alistry Hall will be would be slightly misleading. But I can guarantee you that all options with our estates team and senior officers will be looked at. Thank you.
Next one is from Councillor Lind.
Councillor Lind's question is, please can the Cabinet member clarify whether it is only emergency repairs as being carried out on the George V Pavilion and why?
Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Lind?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for your response, Councillor. However, regarding King George V Pavilion, the kitchen has been condemned, the fridge is missing and the knobs have been taken off the cooker, so it can't be used. The kitchen cupboard doors are hanging off, amongst lots of other issues with this pavilion. Do you think that this building is an appropriate state to serve our community in Blaegreaves? And if not, would you agree to meet my colleagues and I on a site visit? Thank you.
Councillor Pearce.
Councillor Lind, thanks for the supplementary question. It does say in the original answer that condition survey was carried out in February 22. But if you're saying that there's certain works that's got to be done since then, of course I'll meet you. I'll bring our finance cabinet member as well, and anyone from the Parks Department that you wish to invite as well. Thank you very much.
Next one's from Councillor Nater.
Councillor Nater's question is, what is the Council doing to help Derby residents and businesses reduce energy demand and protect against future fuel price increases?
Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Nater?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Quite a comprehensive response. Thank you.
Thank you. The next one is from Councillor Shanker.
Councillor Shanker's question to Councillor Hassel is, please can the Cabinet member provide an update on the cost, timescale and scope of the Becketwell Arena?
Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Shanker?
I do, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Hassel, and it's good to hear a council project running on time, to budget and to scope. So well done on that. So just for clarity, and it's good to be clear, can you reassure us that the Becketwell Arena will not cost this council a penny more than £45.8 million?
Councillor Hassel, that's a tough one, but please.
Thank you, Councillor Shanker. Obviously, we're in funny times with inflation, funny times with increased materials cost. However, sorry? Good. However, I will make it my duty to ensure this does not go over budget. Thank you.
Next one's from Councillor Repton.
Councillor Repton's question to Councillor Eyre is, what is the administration's current stance on Derby's libraries?
Councillor Repton, do you have a supplementary?
Yes, Mr Mayor. Can Councillor Eyre, on behalf of the Conservative Group, tonight publicly reassure the worried Derby public that all Derby libraries will remain open, and also actively consider taking them back under council control?
Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Councillor Repton. You're still looking for that headline from the Cabinet meeting last week, aren't you? As I said then, and as I repeat again now, we do not embark on the review with the intention of closing libraries. I'm not going to predetermine the outcome of the review, and we'll see what the review says when it comes back to us. Thank you.
Is that a yes or a no?
Thank you. The next question from Councillor Dinser.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillor Dinser's question to Councillor Pearce is, what action has been taken to respond to a recommendation from the Community Scrutiny Review Board to reintroduce compactor days?
Councillor Dinser, do you have a supplementary?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Pearce, for your response. I hope that the decision to act on this resolution by the Scrutiny Board won't take another 6 months, because already 6 months have elapsed. But can I ask you, how much funding was cut from the budget to balance the books for the council? Because the amount would have been much better, in my opinion, much better served in terms of continuing the successful compactor days.
Councillor Pearce.
Councillor Dinser, I don't have those figures in front of me, as you probably would gather. But the second paragraph does say there is still the ability to deliver compactor days using neighbourhood board budgets. Thank you.
The next one is from both Councillor Peatfield and Councillor Kerr.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The councillors' questions are, how will the decision on the relocation of the Forest for the Future be made, and can local schools and community groups rehome trees used for the project?
Councillor Peatfield, do you have a supplementary?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I do. The heat wave we've just endured is a warning of worse to come. In the future, to keep visitors and residents in our city, we have to provide trees for shade. Shaded areas can see temperatures reduced by up to 15 degrees, and it can reduce aircon costs in buildings and businesses up to 50% reduction. So trees in city centres are so important. Now, you've spent £164,000 on this project, and much of that has come from the climate pot. Parks already have plenty of shade. Our city centre has none. Will you please do the right thing for Derby residents and invest in planting these trees for shade in our city centre?
Councillor Pearce.
Again, as I responded to the public question, Councillor Peatfield, thank you for that. I totally agree with you regarding the trees in the city centre. It's all to do with the infrastructure. If we've got the infrastructure to plant the trees in the city centre, we will do. I will ask that question, honestly. But there is a specific area that's been notified that we can plant all those trees in the same footprint, that the kids of this city will get an educational space in that as well. Thank you.
Councillor Kerr, do you have a supplementary?
I do, thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm slightly worried about the idea of planting these young trees in the same footprint as they're in at the moment, because it won't give them space to grow to mature sizes, because they're all young at the moment. So I actually welcome the answer here to say that people can bid in for a tree. I will let people know that that is the case, but from what date will the trees become available?
Councillor Pearce.
I will ask that question at my portfolio meeting on Friday and let you know, Lucy, if that's okay.
Thank you.
The next question is from Councillor Shiraz Khan.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillor Khan's question to Councillor Smale is what reassurance can be given that the disposal of Shaftesbury Sports Centre will be done fairly and equitably?
Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Shiraz Khan?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. And just as a point of information, the next question is mine as well, but it's written down as Councillor Jahangir Khan in there. Right. Thank you for your reply, Councillor Smale. I appreciate that the council needs to adhere to law and various other conditions when sort of disposing of its assets. But what is plainly obvious to me is that the degree of flexibility in sport that's being offered, for example, to the potential purchaser of Allistory Hall, is not equatable to what's being offered in my ward when disposing of assets. I give you the example of the Madeley Centre. You and I have had discussions on this last year. So far it's been banded from pillar to post. No end result. The purchaser has not been spoken to. No sport has been offered to them. And then we go to the debacle that is the Shaftesbury Centre. I read an email about 10 days ago about the need to demolish this before December. Well, I would have thought that it would have been courteous of the officers and you to at least talk to the ward councillors of Arboretum to say, look, this is what we intend to do. To read about it in an email that simply says there was a discussion about it in a cabinet meeting is not the same as being informed by a cabinet member or in a officer to say, look, this is what we intend to do. What I would like from you is for you to ensure that in future any sort of assets that are disposed of are fair, transparent, and that equal sport and flexibility is given right across the city so that the local communities of them wards can enjoy the benefits and not do what you have been doing, not you personally, but maybe you oversaw it, I don't know. But what has happened in the last two cases with Arboretum Ward, Madeley and Shaftesbury. Thank you.
Councillor Smale, that was a long question.
And it will be a short answer. I can give you that assurance. Thank you.
Thank you. And
apologies, Councillor Khan. Will the Cabinet member confirm whether the Council supports assured tenancies across its housing stock?
And do you have a supplementary on that, Councillor?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Yep.
Can I please press you to make a question this time, not a statement?
Will about 10 minutes be okay?
No.
Thank you for your reply, Roy. You and I have often talked about social housing, and I know you're as committed as I am to social housing and to purchase and build as many as possible when the opportunity arises. Would you agree with me that any attempt, or rather, towards fixed-term tenancy is sort of a detriment, really, and it would make us, Derby Homes, just another landlord in the city and take away the fundamental right of our residents who go into social housing believing that their social house is going to be turned into a home for life.
Councillor Webb. It's getting better.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Khan. As you may or may not be aware, there is a consultation at present that finishes in September, which is looking at fixed-term tenancies for properties that have either been adapted for specialist need or larger than 4-bedroomed houses, and the consultation is around whether fixed-term tenancies be introduced for those properties. A, because with adapted properties, if the person who requires the adapted property is no longer within that property, then that property could be made available to some other person who requires those adaptations. But what we would be guaranteeing is that that person, the residents who live in that property that do not require the adaptation, could be moved into another suitable property within the area to make that adapted property available. As you also know, the waiting list for adapted properties is quite considerable, so we are talking a limited number of properties, but we are talking a long time for people to having to wait for some of them. And the larger 4-bedroom plus properties, if those properties are no longer occupied by a larger family, then we would again be looking to ensure that if the under occupancy was in that area, we would move them to a more suitable property. As I say, this is out for consultation at the moment. We have used flexible tenancies for homeless people, and that worked out extremely well. Again, specialist accommodation, and we are looking to do this with these other 2 types of property, and I will await the results of the consultation and we will see what happens from that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Webb. The next question is from Councillor Kerr.
Councillor Kerr's question to Councillor Pearce is: how has the use of glyphosate on council-owned land changed in the 12 months since the resolution of council passed in May 2021 to avoid the routine use of pesticides?
Supplementary, Lucy?
Yes, please, thank you. Thank you for the previous reply, which adds a bit to what you've said here. But this reply actually shows no intentional desire for the council to reduce glyphosate use. It's become a cost issue. Now, if I tell you that I followed the route of a spraying quad bike about a month ago, with most of the spray, that expensive spray, falling on tarmac without any weeds nearby, will you look into a more proactive plan to reduce glyphosate use, make sure it is targeted better? We might manage to save more than a quarter.
Councillor Pearce.
Short answer, Mr. Mayor, yes, Lucy.
The next question is from Councillor Graves, who isn't here, so we'll go on to Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For the record, Councillor Graves' question was: why has the Waterside Cafe on Alveston Park stopped selling day tickets for fishing on Alveston Lake, and why weren't local councillors consulted? The response is published in the booklet. Councillor Martin's question to Councillor Barker is: what is the current waiting time for an appointment to register a death?
Councillor Martin, do you have a...
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, thank you. Thank you for the response, but many people are reporting waiting times of up to 2 weeks, which is stressful, obviously, for a bereaved relative. Can the Cabinet member confirm that the 2 to 3 days waiting time cited here in the answer is actually correct, and ensure that it will be maintained, given that the legal time in which a death should be registered is 5 days? Thank you.
Councillor Barker.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Martin, for that question. Yes, the current waiting time is approximately 2 to 3 days. This service has gone through a large change in the last few years with staffing issues, and of course through COVID as well, when
there was a particular call on the service in relation to the unfortunate deaths that occurred. I know that they have total empathy when it comes to dealing with the matters relating to death, and they try their best with the staffing numbers available to, in actual fact, get well under the 5 days limitations that do exist on a national basis. But don't forget, they also have to deal with marriages and births as well. But priority is given to deaths, and of course they do use their empathy in relation to dealing with them. It's a very stressful time for members of the public, and we recognise that, and they are given the best service possible.
Thank you, Councillor Barker. The next one's from Councillor Lind.
Councillor Lind's question to Councillor Eyre is, how many successful prosecutions have the PPO team brought since 2019?
Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Lind?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Hi. Why have there been no prosecutions other than in Normanton, and why has there only been 3 prosecutions in Normanton when the streets are covered in fly tipping? And the Normanton Empowerment Team campaigned for 7 years for public protection officers to be put in place to carry out these enforcements. Thank you.
Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Councillor Lynn, for the question. Just before I respond, I just want to put on record my thanks, and I hope the whole Chamber's thanks to all of our public protection officers for all the work they do in all wards of our city, come rain or shine, making our streets safer and tackling many of the issues that matter to our businesses and residents. Councillor Lynn, to answer the question, you'll notice the answer provided to your initial question comments only on the fly tipping and other environmental demands, and thus the figures we've been able to provide today in response to the question around successful prosecutions are in response only to the tackling environmental crimes aspect of PPO roles. They also tackle ASB and an array of other matters. Unfortunately, when the question comes in just 2 hours before the deadline, we've pulled together as much data as we can, but I will get the rest of the data and make sure that is available to you. To answer the question, the prosecutions is not the initial first instance aspect of what our PPOs do. We have an engagement, education, enforcement approach, and the figures provided will not include the tools including fixed penalty notices, community protection warnings, and community protection notices. But if you're aware of areas of fly tipping, I highly encourage you to report it to the teams who will deal with it in the best way possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Eyre. The next one is from Councillor Shanker.
Councillor Shanker's question to Councillor Smale is, what is the current market offer to Derby residents in the city centre? Apologies, I believe Councillor Pearce is answering this question.
Councillor Shanker, supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, Councillor Pearce, then, for your answer. Given that the Eagle market the Eagle Centre market is likely to close following the consultation and replaced possibly with a low-cost German supermarket. Given that our esteemed Deputy Leader of the Council is a current or former President of NABMAR, how embarrassing do you think it is for him that from January next year to maybe for another 18 months, Derby will have no city centre market offer?
Councillor Pearce.
I can't speak for the Deputy Leader's embarrassment if he ever has any. I've never seen him with any embarrassment. But I'm aware of Cow Street management and senior officers of this authority talking with traders as to the requirements and ongoing situation relating to the Eastern Gateway project. Discussions are still taking place, as you very well know, and as soon as those discussions are over, we will let you know what the outcome is. Thank you.
Next one's from Councillor Dinser.
Councillor Dinser's question to Councillor Williams is, can the Cabinet member confirm whether figures relating to the number of children attending the holidays, activities and food programme relate to individual children or the numbers attending sessions? Does the programme represent value for money, and what plans are in place to extend the provision to those eligible children not currently accessing the programme?
Councillor Dinser, do you have a supplementary question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Williams, thank you very much for your response. And I note and congratulate the action plans to reach the 66%, which is over 7,000 pupils in Derby from the most vulnerable communities who are still not able to access this service. Would you agree with me that we need to do as much as possible and quickly as possible to make sure as many pupils benefit as possible? And I know that that will be limited by the funds we get at the moment, and we need to do as much as possible to ask further funding from central government to enable some of the most deprived pupils in Derby to benefit.
Councillor Whelan.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dinser, for your answer. It's up to each and every one of you. You all have access to your own social media platforms. You all have access to your communities. The information is on the Derby City Council website. There are some amazing opportunities for young people in this city to take part in the HAF programme. There's some fantastic things going on, from drama, singing, horse riding, gardening, cooking. It's all there on the website for our residents to have a look at and choose. Of course, we're promoting this through our schools, through Community Action Derby. We're doing a lot of work around the promotion, but please do make sure that you promote it on your social media websites. I will have another chat with the comms team and make sure that you get the link to the website for it. But please do go out there. Tell them what a good thing it is. It's fantastic. And if you do get the opportunity to go along to have programmes in your wards, please go along. I'm sure that you will enjoy yourselves, as I know that a couple of our councillors did last summer, particularly Jerry and John, who took place in the egg and spoon race. But, you know, it is a really fantastic opportunity for young people to get involved and to get a nutritious meal as well during the day. So please do take part in it. Do take part in the promotion of it. Make sure that your residents know about it. Make sure that they get to go about it. It is all fully funded. It's there for us to use. Please make sure they do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. The next one is from Councillor Peatfield.
Councillor Peatfield's question to Councillor Smale is how many residents have now received their £150 council tax rebate?
Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Peatfield?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do. We have had multiple people contacting us who are on direct debit, who have applied correctly, on time, and they still do not have their payments. So my question is, how many have not received the £150 council tax payment?
Councillor Smale.
Thank you very much for your question, Councillor Peatfield. Obviously, I won't know that exact figure. I believe we have around about 120,000 households, I believe. But what we'll do is I'll go back to our council tax teams and get that information for you. If there's any individuals that have in circumstances around not receiving their council tax rebate, then of course send them on to me, those requests, and I can obviously have a chat with the head of service. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smale. The next one is from Councillor Kerr.
Councillor Kerr's question to Councillor Hassel is how long will it take for the council to develop a biodiversity action plan?
Do you have a supplementary, Lucy?
I can repeat the same question. How long will it take us to develop our biodiversity action plan, given that we are getting the information on which to base that this autumn?
Thank you, Lucy. Yeah, obviously we're up against it with the information that's coming in, but you, as you all know, as a climate champion, we will try and enact it as soon as we possibly can. Thank you.
Thank you. Next one's from Councillor A.W. Graves, who's not here, and then one from Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Graves' question to Councillor Pearce was why has the Cabinet failed to address resident concerns and 2 council resolutions relating to noisy fireworks? Councillor Martin's question to Councillor Webb is how many social care staff working for Derby City Council did not receive a retention payment bonus this winter for which they were eligible?
Councillor Martin, do you have a supplementary?
I do. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for the response to the question, but my follow-on question is why did the council set eligibility criteria that excluded those who had taken time off sick, given that is not unreasonable and care staff recruitment and retention is so difficult? Will the council make good that non-payment from the funds available or from its own budget? Thank you.
Councillor Webb.
Council are not in a position to do that, Councillor Martin, as you well know, and that criteria was set for us.
Thank you. The next one is again from Councillor Shanker.
Councillor Shanker's question is without reliance on reserves, did the council underspend or overspend on its budget for 2021-22?
Supplementary, Councillor Shanker.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Given that this time last year, this administration was predicting a £11 million overspend, and yet we're still not quite sure what they actually delivered, because at Cabinet it was claimed it was a 2.86 million underspend, and now we've seen from today's answer it was actually a 1.265 million overspend. But given that current trajectory, can the Cabinet member reassure us that Q1 for this year will outturn close to budget, and if he gets anywhere near a double figure overspend predicted again, he'll consider his position?
Councillor Smale.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. It's quite ironic taking a lecture from the previous Cabinet member or previous administration who handed over a budget to us with an £8 million deficit. However, let me answer my question, thank you. Absolutely, I will not question my own position, because we are in such a unique position. We've got some big debates tonight, in particular around a pay award. We don't know, the budget is set in a snapshot of time, and I keep saying this, and they always fluid movement. We always have the intention of setting a budget and bringing it into as close as possible. You know that, Councillor Shanker, you've been Cabinet Member for Finance for quite some time. So you will understand that there will always be movements in the years. There will be pressures that come our way that sometimes we can't predict. We've got a broken care market. We've got the up-and-coming Social Care Act reform, which we know that at the current moment is going to cause us some issues moving forward. We've got pay inflations. We've also just got generic inflations such as gas and electricity, supplies, costs of road materials. There's a lot of capital projects that we know that are going to be struggling to meet the demands of our supply chains. So we're not hiding anything here. We're being honest with you. When we do supply these pressures, we are being honest at the time. And because of some of the great work and fantastic work from our council officers to bring down a Q1 pressure of that amount into a balanced budget at the end of the year is a real testament to some of the teams that have been working in the background, most notably Councillor Williams' teams and Andy Smith's team in Children's Services, because we are trying our absolute best to look after our looked after children, and it's a real testament to the work that's going on in the background. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smale. Another question from Councillor Dinser.
Councillor Dinser's question to Councillor Pearce is: what action is being taken to reverse reduction in the use of the Rainsway Household Waste Recycling Centre following the introduction of an online booking system?
Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Dinser?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Pearce, thank you for your response. Sadly, though, I note that you are still continuing to persist with this policy, which is making many residents still not access a service which will be the betterment for our environment. Whilst I agree that stopping non-domestic waste carriers using this facility is good, are you able to confirm that the justification for continuing with this, that is a 54% reduction in service, 61% reduction in tonnage removed from our neighbourhoods, can all be attributed to the non-domestic waste carrier success?
Councillor, isn't it, it's a bit like Groundhog Day, to be quite honest. It seems to be having this question every time we come to full council. I will sort out the figures for those. I will sort out figures for the trade waste from the last few years. That's no problem at all. I can do that. And that will prove it then. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is from Councillor Kerr.
Councillor Kerr's question to Councillor Webb is: what long-term advice is being offered to help Derby businesses, schools and individuals minimise the spread of infections and mitigate the impact of both COVID-19 and long COVID?
Councillor Kerr, do you have a supplementary?
Yes, please, Mr. Mayor. When we're having major statements from our Director of Public Health advising us on radio to be wearing masks again in crowded places, which I've been wearing, very few other people are, and we're not complying with that, it makes me really sad. But it also makes me sad that we are not looking further forward. It isn't only COVID that is an infection that spreads between people. So therefore, what are we doing longer term to keep people in Derby healthy, to reduce infection transmission within our own estate, such as improving ventilation in buildings and adding high quality air filtration, so systems already have good air systems.
Councillor Webb.
If only I knew the answer to that, Lucy. The advice we get from national government and our own public health is the advice that we pass on to residents, businesses, schools, care homes, wherever we can pass that information out, and to local residents themselves. We are living with COVID, and unfortunately it is having an impact on services in and around the city, as you'll probably hear later in the motions, but we will continue to advise people what is best and hopefully keep within the rules ourselves.
Thank you. The next question is from Councillor A.W. Graves, who's not here. The one after that is from Councillor Kerr.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. For the record, Councillor Graves' question to Councillor Hassel was, can the Cabinet member explain why Derby did not apply for the latest round of active travel funding? The answer is published in the booklet. Councillor Kerr's question to Councillor Hassel are any temperature and air quality measures being taken to identify the impact of the temporary forest in the marketplace?
Councillor Kerr, do you have a supplementary? No, thank you. Again, Councillor A.W. Graves' question, and he's not here, followed by one from Councillor Kerr.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The final questions this evening, Councillor Graves' question for the record to Councillor Pearce was, can the Cabinet member clarify the rules relating to bonfires in Derby? And Councillor Kerr's question to Councillor Poulter is, what consultation will be done with Derby residents to identify projects for any future rounds of levelling up funding made available by the government?
Councillor Kerr, do you have a supplementary?
Mr Mayor, I do for this one. Given the sometimes short timeframes which are mentioned in the answer, it would seem to be important to actually encourage people to make suggestions and come forward with ideas more so than not, if we are going to be able to put forward good ideas and have done sufficient work in terms of levelling up bids. Can we actually start some discussion with the public and encourage people to come forward, recognising that ideas may not be used?
Councillor Poulter.
Lucy Dunn, actually, you may not be aware, but we have a current conversation going on about our city centre plans, which the public are more than welcome and encouraged to take part in.
Thank you, Councillor Poulter. The next item of business is a minute extract from the Audit and Governance Committee presenting their annual report for the previous municipal year. Councillor West, as chair of the committee, would you move the minute, please?
Thank you, Mayor. I will keep it quick. Firstly, I hope everybody enjoyed reading the report. Secondly, to reiterate my thanks as listed on page 2 to all involved in the committee. Thirdly, to remind all councillors who sit on scrutiny committees that they also play a very important part in the governance of this council. And finally, to move as printed.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Hazelgrave. Any other speakers on this? In which case, those in favour, please show. Okay. Anybody against? That's carried. And now consider a report in relation to the ongoing local government boundary review. The Commission have now published their proposals for Derby, and this report allows councillors to debate how the council will respond to the public consultation. Councillor Barker, as the Cabinet Member for Governance, will you move the recommendation in the report, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Move the recommendations as printed.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Poulter. Anybody else wish to speak on this? Councillor Shanker.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Derby Labour Group thanks the Commission for its assiduous work and generally welcomes these proposals. Their report is a testament to their impartiality and is a better vision for Derby, we believe. The Commission has had a hard job to balance the various factors that make up wards, but this is a sensible, moderate proposal that creates new opportunities for 6 areas to have better, more local representation. Exactly what we were calling for in February. The Commission accepts that the Conservative Liberal Democrat reform attempt to freeze our city in time is not workable, and has made substantial changes to that weak approach which has no vision for Derby. And despite the hyperbole the Conservatives on this council at the previous meeting, the Commission accepts Labour's proposals for what they are, an honest reflection of our community's interests. The bulk of Labour's ideas have been taken into account and balanced against other submissions and criteria, which is absolutely right, Mr. Mayor, and what I would expect the Boundary Commission to do. I'm even told Councillor Cooper is already looking for another hiding place, having had the boot from parts of Chaddesden. Labour's proposal was almost 500 words long, Mr. Mayor. The Lib Dems proposal, I believe, was around 800 words long. Even Reform put a tiny proposal in, around 400 words, I believe. The Conservatives didn't even bother putting a proposal in. Labour took this process seriously and continued to do so, imagined what a better Derby could look like, and worked with local people, trade unions, community groups, businesses and other stakeholders to create this vision. And that has been recognised clearly by the Commission. Labour is the only party that released its plan for public comment. Labour is the party that values people's views instead of trying to stitch up the status quo and avoid change. Labour will take time to speak to local people about these proposals, but on the face of it, they look to be fair and measured way and reflect how Derby is now, not how it was more than 20 years ago. I'm sure there are further tweaks and these proposals can be adjusted and improved, but we will continue to work and submit these to the Boundary Commission directly as we did before. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Shanker. Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My group did put in indeed a submission, and we will be putting in more comments on the draft proposals as well, because not all of them actually respect community boundaries as well as they could do. So while we thank the Boundary Commission for the work that they've done thus far, we do hope that they will be open-minded to new evidence that we can produce for them. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Shanker, I don't think you can accuse myself and my group of hyperbole and then make a speech like that one. I just want to put on record for the Local Government Boundary Commission my thanks to them for keeping the, and I believe my colleagues' thanks as well, for their decision to keep the Western Oakwood area within Oakwood Ward and reject the disgraceful proposals to split my community up, to remove the community identity, and to draw lines down pathways and across fields and across roads, lines that did not exist. You mentioned, Councillor Shanker, you talk about the public comment. You certainly got that from my ward. The Boundary Commission references the anger that you caused among residents in my ward by attempting to split our community apart. It was rightly rejected, and I thank the Boundary Commission for that. Thank you.
Councillor Poulter. Well, I know Councillor Barker asked it, but you do have the right to sum up the debate as you moved it. If you wish to. Okay, Councillor Poulter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Quite a simple contribution to this, because we've heard a lot from Councillor Shanker as to what the Labour group do, and what their intentions are. What he forgot to mention was the absolutely unashamed gerrymandering that he attempted in the process. And by the sounds of it, he intends to continue that process and trying to gerrymander a situation whereby his party is favoured by the boundary reviews. The Conservative group trusted and do trust and thank the Commission for their work on this and to do it sensibly. To say that the bulk of the recommendations from the Labour group was accepted is not actually true, because what's actually happened is that the Boundary Commission saw through the gerrymandering proposals, as Councillor Ayres pointed out, and that will continue. So ultimately, whatever the boundary arrangements are next year, when we win it and we win the election and take forward this council for the next 4 years, their attempts at gerrymandering will have been wasted. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Poulter. Anybody else wish to contribute before I ask Councillor Barker to sum up? Councillor Barker.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor. It's such a shame that this particular review by the Boundary Commission has to resort to political tic-tac, and it's ridiculous. The local government boundary review, when they first came to the city and saw myself as the deputy and leader, said that they would not consider to any great extent any particular partisan line. We respected that and we stuck to that. Unfortunately, others didn't. And I have to say that at the recent LGA conference, there was a stand there where the local government boundary review people were there, and the chairman was there, and I happened to speak to him and said thank you for the report. And I talked in relation to particularly some of the assets that they've changed, and said I really don't particularly understand them. And he said, well, I won't discuss it with you because you are a political animal and you are here in that guise, and so therefore, as we said before, we will in actual fact not take into account political mishmashes and political shenanigans in relation to gerrymandering, as was said by my colleague. And so therefore I still respect that, and whilst this is a reminder to groups, it would be far better if they did away with this political point scoring and talk to the public they serve and see whether or not they, as they did in Oakwood, write directly to the Commission for any changes they still wish to make. The schedule is still open until the 8th of August. I recommend to the people of Derby not to listen to us politicians, but to do what they want in their areas, and if they don't feel that it's right, write to the Commission themselves. It will carry far more weight than Councillor Banwaite, or sorry, Banwaite. Where did I get that from? That was a bad mistake, that was. It will carry far more weight than colleagues on my left putting forward any further political viewpoint. Thank you.
Thank you. The motion is the recommendations in the report. Those in favour, please show. Okay. Anybody against? That is... sorry? There was one. Right. One against, but the motion is carried. The recommendations in the report. The next item is constitutional review. Yes, under CP 59D, that the vote be now put. Those in favour of going to the vote immediately? Not the vote, but going to the vote immediately. Those against going to the vote immediately? Right, that is carried. Those in favour of the recommendation, but can I have a seconder before we do that? Councillor Smale.
So have it moved and seconded.
Right, well, the mover of the motion, please. Can you just move it? Move it, okay, and we've got a seconder, but we have had a notice of motion, a CP 59D to go to the vote immediately. So those in favour of the recommendation, please show. Thank you. Anybody against? That is carried. We're doing well.
Mr Mayor, can I say one of the part of the recommendation is that we form a working party, and that working party consists of 2 members from the Conservative administration. They will be myself and Councillor Jerry, and Councillor Jed Potter. Sorry, Jerry.
Moving on then to the notices of motion. We've got that, okay. Item 12 then, moved by Councillor Peatfield, seconded by Councillor Whitby. Councillor Peatfield.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. In April this year, I sent a letter to the Leader of the Council laying out the theme and the proposals of this motion this evening. Sadly, and quite rudely really, I did not receive a response or even an acknowledgement to that letter, so here we are. We have a motion rather than a letter and a discussion, but perhaps now the Leader of the Council would engage with us this evening. So, Mr Mayor, we only have to look at the recent local headlines to recognise how relevant this motion is right now. Spondon Flyer, one of 4 Trent Barton routes to be cancelled permanently. Urgent public meeting to take place after vital Derby bus services axed. Arriva axes Derby route as pandemic means fewer people using buses. Bus which got me out and about after COVID is being cut and I'll be stuck on my own. But most recently and most importantly, the headline, Danger to Life as Extreme Heat Warning Issues for Derbyshire. Now, while the last headline may not be directly relevant to this motion, or it may not seem to be, it is relevant to the climate catastrophe that is heading our way, and the last 2 days is just the taste of things to come. If we ever needed a sign, folks, this is it. We, as individuals, as community leaders, as a council and as a nation, ignore it at our peril. The point is, to urgently tackle the climate catastrophe, we have to get people out of cars. We cannot wait any longer. I ask that this council prioritises public transport if we are to seriously make a difference to climate change. We have to make it as easy as possible for people to change their habits. You know, 57% of motorists would use their car less if bus fares were lower and services were more available. Now, how many of those 57% would reduce down from a 2-car family to a 1-car family? But it's not just about changing motorists' habits, it's about ensuring that our population of non-drivers, from the older generation who no longer drive, non-drivers, disabled residents, young people unable to afford a car, who all need reliable, affordable, accessible bus services. Businesses complain that they are short-staffed at the moment, but did you know that 19% of workers turn down jobs due to a poor bus service? Since 2005, bus fares have risen 71%, and while shareholders are taking home record-breaking amounts of dividends, wages have stagnated, as we know. So yet again, it is the worst off who suffer the most. Those with the least, who perhaps can't afford a car or to run it, who must rely on bus travel, they pay the highest fares with the least in their pockets. Now, the issue of public transport affects our lives in a myriad of ways, and the Enhanced Bus Partnership is an opportunity to begin to make the urgent changes that we need. And we know that 7.2 million is not enough. We know it only scratches the surface, but that is why we've brought this motion to full council today. This motion asks our side of the partnership, Derby City Council, to make sure that our priorities are heard in that partnership. We understand that there are boundaries and that the partnership means we don't hold all of the cards, but we do hold sway, we hold permissions, and we hold negotiation power. So we asked Derby City Council to prioritise 4 key issues that will help Derby move forward to improve bus services and make bus travel a preferred option to car travel. The first point asks for a commission, a report to bring Derby buses back into local control of the City Council by franchising the service. It asks only for a report, Mr Mayor. Transport for London regulates routes and fares, and Manchester is linking routes. They're starting with the city, and charging only the maximum of £2 per journey. But they're rolling it out to the combined authority by 2025. We have that option coming up in future years of the combined authority, but if we say that joining D2N2 will improve bus connectivity, and we're arguing that as a point for becoming a combined authority, then we need the work to start now in our city. We need to catch up with Nottingham. Waiting to start the work in 2024 onwards will be too late for the climate and for the thousands of people who currently can't afford petrol to get to work. It's only going to get worse from October as well, as our bills rise again. We need to investigate our options, and while the enhanced partnership is a start, it's not the end or the answer. Our second request of our motion this evening is a full review and a deep delve consultation of current services, travel mapping, and assessment of community needs. We have 2 private companies covering different parts of Derby without joined up thinking. We don't have a full bus map available to help us connect from one side of the city to the other. We don't have an up-to-date app that tells us real-time information and how to get from A to D via N or Z. We have pockets of communities stranded, people who could and should catch a bus to work, but they don't because it's easier to drive and to park, or cheaper to do so. We need a comprehensive understanding not only of what our needs are now, but of what the alternatives could look like. Where do people travel from and to across Derby, and could we make it easier for them to do so by bus? Our third request of our motion is to bring back the services that we have reduced or removed. Now, we understand that the BSIP funds can't be used to restore those lost services, but how can we find alternatives? The results of priority 2 of our motion would feed into priority 3 and back up where the capital changes to areas could result in a higher uptake of bus travel, enabling routes to be trialled for restoration. Now, going back to those headlines regarding the Spondon flyer, for example, we read that Councillor Poulter was honestly shocked that Trent Barton seemed determined to pick on people of Spondon. And 2,000 signatures from Spondon suggested that that bus is still very much needed. But of course, it's not just a Spondon issue, is it? And it's not about who shouts the loudest. It's Mackworth, Mickletover, Oakwood, Chaddesden, Sinfin, Alveston, Darley Abbey, Alistry, Littleover. It's all of our communities. Honestly, we're not all honestly shocked, as it has been happening for some time now. And the fourth part of the motion is asking to introduce methods that make our bus journeys easiest, quickest, and the most affordable way of travelling. And this is, Mr. Mayor, the crux of the motion. The need, the urgent game changer that Derby needs. I'll repeat that stat again. 57% of motorists would use their car less if fares were lower and services were more available. Most of all, in asking for these priorities to be at the forefront of the part we play in the BSIP, we don't want to see a single penny of that 7.2 million awarded being spent on ways that enhance profitability of routes over affordability. We have, for example, a pot of Section 106 money that comes under our Sinfin board, and it's allocated to public transport on the Stenson corridor. It's a pot of £220,000. That's not insignificant. But rather than it being allocated to enabling our transport and the corridor to be more easily accessed or affordable, it's allocated to improving bus shelters and real-time information at stops. Now, I don't argue that that is something that is useful, but you ask a Sinfin bus user on the 38 if they would rather have buses running so they are less crowded and they can get a seat and get to work on time, or would they rather stand and wait longer under a nice shelter, watch the arrival time change and it getting later and later, only to have the bus drive by because it's full? It's about priorities, not frivolities. Real change, not tinkering at the edges. Public transport reduces pollution, cuts congestion, provides transport for all. One full double-decker bus can take up to 75 cars off the road. So why aren't we doing everything we can to make our bus service the easiest, cheapest and most convenient way to travel? Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Whitby, you're down as seconded. Do you wish to speak now or reserve your right?
I'll speak now, Mr Mayor, thank you. Mr Mayor, without any attempt at consultation or mitigation, the number 9 bus was unceremoniously scrapped on the 24th of April this year. Residents predominantly along Ashbourne Road who've been socially isolated due to the pandemic for the best part of the last 2 years are going to be socially isolated indefinitely. This is of course a business decision taken in regards to what should be a public service. I've got no real quarrel with Arriva. They after all exist to make a profit. They're not burdened by having to deal with the social consequences of their actions, unlike the council. And passenger numbers are down, as they are all over the country. The reality is the pandemic is not over, despite Freedom Day being 12 months ago. People are still nervous and more time is needed to allow passenger numbers to return to something like pre-pandemic levels. Arriva told me that the number 9 bus was economically viable before the pandemic. So I see absolutely no reason why it shouldn't return to being economically viable given time. And there are those that think that numbers will never return to pre-pandemic levels. So what do we do? Do we just give up? Obviously we don't. We make our public transport more attractive and presumably cheaper. It's worth saying that there is another bus service that goes up and down Ashbourne Road. That's called the Swift, but it only runs once an hour. And when I asked one of our officers about the possibility of increasing its frequency, I was told that the Swift itself was at risk once funding support is withdrawn. We could be left with no bus service on one of Derby's main thoroughfares. And there's a few things going on down Ashbourne Road. There's several thousand properties in Mackworth Ward and Darley Ward, a university campus, Royal School for the Deaf, the main entrance to our Premier Park, one of the biggest McDonald's in the region, and of course Mackworth Estate. There's plenty down there to warrant a bus service. We've got residents unable to get to medical appointments, access to shops, get to work, and no doubt when it comes to winter, given the cost of living debacle in this country, there'll be residents who are unable to get on a bus to keep warm. It all just highlights how completely powerless we are with our public transport. And despite having a seat at the table with the bus companies, our only real power is public subsidy. Mr Mayor, I am therefore asking that the publicly announced £7.2 million government grant for public transport be used in part to subsidise routes like the number 9 that has been axed and the Spondon Flyer that is going to be axed. No doubt there'll be a whole load of reasons why we can't use this money to support what should be the people's bus service. But I don't really care what they are, and I'm pretty sure the public don't either. If the political will is there, a way can be found. We want our future for public transport that includes frequent, affordable and green buses. But fundamentally, we want a future for public transport. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Whitby. Councillor Repton.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. There is sadly a theme here. And instead of trying to increase bus travel and the numbers of using our bus services, we have a long list this evening of bus service losses and bus service reductions affecting many people who are reliant on bus services to carry out their day-to-day lives and functioning. People are denied access to their workplaces, they're denied access to their doctors, their shops and their schools. And yet this is at a time of a climate emergency, when we should be relying less on cars and more on public transport. How on earth can the people of Derby rely on public transport when we see these buses being either stopped or reduced? And this council has no control at all because it's all driven by profit and commercial concerns. Over 35 years, I fought for and been successful until a year ago in saving the 17A Darley service. Many people rely on that service to get into town, to get to Park Farm, to their GP and to get into work. And they've struggled. They've been landlocked in the village with difficulty accessing because of often age or their lack of mobility, the main road and bus services. So we have proposals this evening which at least starts to address the many concerns of the thousands of people that would like an alternative to their cars, and those thousands of people who have no alternative at all, who see the City Council sitting on its hands while services are reduced or cut altogether. So I would urge all councillors to start that process this evening and back this motion and make sure that we can have a bus service in this city that we all need and all want to see. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Repton. I wonder how many of us came on the bus today? That's perhaps no, it's out of order. Councillor Jerry Pearce.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I'm going to be the one that tells you the technical bits why we can't use this funding. As a group, we are fully aware of the difficulties in some areas with reduced and removed bus services. However, the motion refers to the use of the proposed BSIP funding, which would prove difficult. The bus network is a legally deregulated market with local authorities having very little or no direct influence. The passenger transport industry as a whole has been severely damaged by the pandemic, and passenger numbers in Derby reflect the national position for urban areas, around 80% of pre-pandemic levels. There are additional factors within the industry in terms of rising costs for both fuel and workforce shortage, and we of course now see more hybrid working, where commuting to a workplace is not necessarily undertaken in the manner it was previously. The last of the government's special aid grants will end in September, and the operators are now making business decisions where they are trying to balance cost and income and trying to ensure a sustainable position. It is widely accepted that passenger transport offers the best opportunity for making the biggest long-term impact on community travel behaviour. A good functional transport network is important to the whole city. The Council is doing what it currently can by supporting concessionary first payments at the level of 2019 in collaboration with Derbyshire County Council. There is also investment in public transport infrastructure as a major part of the Transforming Cities programme, approximately £20 million. The BSIP fund of £7.2 million is currently indicative funding. This has been subject to further dialogue with the DfT. It is clear from this process that the release of funding is being steered by meeting key government policy targets. An announcement is currently expected in October. Every local authority was required to submit a BSIP. Derby were only one of 31 councils in the whole country that have been offered indicative funding. The funding is for the enhanced partnership, and the council is an equal partner with the bus operators. In response to the recommendations in the motion, recommendation 1, funding for this will not be available through the BSIP to undertake this work. However, it is highly likely that Derby, as a single medium-sized local authority, would struggle to obtain the powers for franchising. The council would effectively need to establish a passenger transport authority. This would take 2 to 3 years to establish and would cost approximately £2 to £3 million, along with operational costs of approximately £1.5 million per year. There is also considerable risk associated with the activity, particularly in a period of rising inflationary costs. In reality, franchising is complicated and is really the territory of combined authority, as Councillor Peakford said. So this may be one of the key themes of an East Midlands D2N2 combined authority. As part of this, a passenger transport executive is very likely to be formed. Recommendation 2. The good news is that a comprehensive network stroke service review along the lines you have identified appears to be one of the key government policy objectives. £100,000 has been suggested within the £7.2 million BSIP to do this work and conduct a wide consultation, including asking fundamental questions such as what do people want from passenger transport. Recommendation 3. The current guidance on the use of the £7.2 million is that we will not be allowed to fund services that have been removed. It may be possible to fund services that have been reduced, but further guidance will be provided by government. Only £2 million of the funding is for revenue, and it is expected to be spread over 3 years. The enhanced partnership is being guided to support ticketing schemes, which may include daily capping and frequent user discounts. Even if supporting reduced services is eventually allowed, the level of funding is small and will have to be prioritised. Recommendation 4. There may be some limited opportunities to have a small influence on fares as part of the affordable element of the suggestion. In relation to the easiest and quickest elements, then the Council is fortunate to have Transforming Cities funding to enhance routes and bus shelters and information systems. If the BSIP funding is released, then there will be an additional £5 million available for capital schemes. The National Bus Strategy strongly promotes that local authorities need to test the benefits of route improvements, including technology at traffic signals and physical measures such as bus lanes. Where the evidence provides a significant benefit, then local authorities should implement measures. We as a council are currently testing these measures. Proposed schemes are likely to be announced in the future, but Transforming Cities programme has already delivered public transport benefits such as detection capabilities at Pentagon Island and changes in the city centre. Therefore, whilst we agree in some principles of what this motion is trying to achieve, we wouldn't be able to implement some of these points established because of the limitation on what is required in the BSIP funding criteria. However, this is a great opportunity for us all, cross-party, to work together and to come up with practical solutions to our bus services and residents in Derby. Thank you.
Was that exactly 5 minutes?
Time to perfection, Alex.
Councillor Poulter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I found it interesting at the beginning of Councillor Peatfield's contribution that she sought to criticise me for not answering a letter of demand, really, from her, to which she's just had the answer in relation to them being unachievable or unreasonable or impractical. Maybe she would have been better served at the time to encourage the leader of her party, who failed to respond to a letter I wrote to him, inviting him to disassociate himself from the words and behaviour of a former leader of the Labour Party in the city, a former MP, Chris Williamson. He declined to do so. I got no response to that, and shamingly, he appears to be supportive of that view in relation to the Ukraine. That said, Councillor Peatfield has referred to the fact that I was shocked and disappointed at the announcement made by Trent Barton, and I certainly was, and it gives me the opportunity now to explain why I was shocked and disappointed, and that is the fact that, you know, the Spondon Flyer service was an exemplar service for Trent Barton, nationally recognised not too many years ago for its efficiency, its profit making and service to the community. It was only when Trent Barton started to tinker with the service by reducing its frequency, changing the route, making it a one-way route around the place, and then stopping it during COVID, to the point whereby it absolutely destroyed the service for the residents of Spondon. And since that point, we have been, my colleagues, Councillor Williams and Councillor Ralston, have been absolutely all over Trent Barton to explain the repercussions of the loss of the service and seek reassurance that the service would be returned, which we got from the brand manager, from the chief executive themselves, in relation to bringing the service back as and when there were drivers available and whatever. So you can imagine my shock when, having delivered a petition of 2,500 signatures directly to the chief executive, who came to the village to receive it, promised to talk to and research options in relation to alternative services, maybe involving community transport, etc. And then only weeks later to get this announcement that they were withdrawing the service completely. That's why I was shocked, Mr. Mayor. That's why it's not acceptable for Trent Barton to abandon the public of Spondon, to cause them to be in their own homes, isolated, and to damage the businesses in the city to an extent whereby many of them are suffering. It's unacceptable that the actions that they've taken. They didn't even restore the service, having closed it last year, to test whether it was viable or not. They simply took a unilateral decision to remove the service. And as a result of that, the people of Spondon will get their opportunity tomorrow night at a public meeting, which we anticipate will be attended by very many residents of the village, to personally explain their dissatisfaction with Trent Barton's decision. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Poulter. Councillor Kerr.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. 4 years ago, Little Over's equivalent of the 17, was it 17A, I'm sorry, I can't remember, was under threat. And we spent 6 months as a community trying to keep it going, publicising it, getting it subsidised from local people putting their own hands in their pockets. And people fought as hard as they could to keep it. And we got close to achieving that because we started to see a growth in patronage. We tweaked the route so that there were more people who were close to it, and people whom it really mattered got their friends to understand it and how you could use it. That is really the key to getting bus services working. It's public engagement, it's knowledge about where the bus services go, it's encouraging people to look at their lifestyles and making changes to them. But that doesn't happen actually by the things that are listed here. It's the marketing, it's the publicity, it's the community belief in a service that will make the difference. It's all the sorts of things that we talked up and said mattered during COVID. It's the public engagement, it's working with the public. And those are the messages that I hope that our officers can take away and work on, and the bus companies and the other partners in the enhanced partnership will be able to take forward. The great value of this motion tonight is that we are talking in this chamber about buses, because as the mover and seconder said, buses are really important. They're important locally, they're important to people, they're important for help us deliver the action Derby needs to take about climate change. I don't think it'll make any difference in terms of what we're asking for here. I don't think that franchising at the current stage is the way forward. I think that the review and deep delve into the community consultation is important, and I really hope that that will be done with really solid community engagement. Because the services that we have running at the moment aren't necessarily, or under threat at the moment, aren't necessarily the most important services for the future. Just as Labour have said we shouldn't be getting stuck in where we are in terms of ward boundaries, so we shouldn't be thinking that bus services that have been running for the last 20 or 30 years are necessarily the right ones for the future. And we need to be open to that and looking at a full deep dive, which I think is what is intended here. So we may need to bring back some services, but there may be others that need to be superseded. The biggest, most important thing is the publicity. It's the marketing. That isn't specifically called for here. We need to be planning for the future, and we need to be just putting buses higher up everybody's agenda. So I think my group will be supporting this, but not because we think it'll make any difference, but because it's important to talk buses. And hopefully the small amount of funding will be used really effectively at doing something to raise the priority of buses in Derby.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillor Kerr said some of what I was going to say. I like buses, I use buses a lot, and like Councillor Whitby, I have an electric car, and we like the fact that you lot are paying our fuel duty and our vehicle exercise duty for us, but we still use the cars. You asked Mr Mayor about coming here tonight on the bus. I used to be able to, but they cut the service a little about 18 months ago, so now I can't get home, and the bus is only every 2 hours, so I've used my electric car to come down here tonight. I'm also, like Councillor Kerr, share reservations. When you look at the disaster that franchising has had on the railways, I'm not convinced about that aspect either. But it is important that we talk about buses, and Councillor Kerr's right, we will be supporting this motion. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Dinser.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I would really, despite the responses from Councillor Pearce and Councillor Poulter, I would really encourage all members in this chamber to support this motion. The reality is, and Councillor Pearce's response alluded to this, the reality is our influence, our ability to change and provide bus services, particularly for those who rely on buses as the only way of moving around the city or beyond, but for people who are using cars, and encourage them to come to use buses as well, is to make them more accessible, better networked, cheaper fares, and where the commercial imperative stops bus companies from delivering certain routes. And because the fact is that our subsidy capability has reduced over years and years, so that we can't always compensate and fill the gaps where the commercial or bus companies cannot deliver for their particular commercial imperative. The time has come to look and explore whether a better way to provide the service to the people of Derby is by having more control and considering, and I think the resolution only looks at exploring the option of bringing back into control of the local authority bus services delivery. Where local authorities have done that, they have proven that they can not only provide a more joined up and a more reachable for all communities service, but they can actually expand it, they can grow it, they can actually get investment to make the services even better, modern, and, in terms of this resolution, to tackle climate change at the same time. There are good examples up and down the country where that is happening. We don't have to reinvent the wheel, but we do need to have the motivation and the courage to consider that the current situation, the £7.2 million funding, well, we know that our influence is by persuasion, and we are one small player in this partnership which is going to be looking at this. And I know that our impact will be not as great, despite all the Wood Partnership working, despite all the things that Councillor Pearce mentioned in his response. We need to do something more. We need to consider more. This resolution is exploring how we can do that, whilst maintaining and maximising the work about partnership working and persuasion, or even though I think it's not going to be enough. We do need to really support this motion for climate change and for the people of Derbyshire, especially those in isolated, deprived communities where bus services for the commercial imperative are unable to continue providing a service. So please consider seriously supporting this resolution.
Councillor Smale.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Just I do have an element of nervousness around franchising any bus services. And I think I agree with largely in parts of the comments that Councillor Kerr has made in relation to bullet point 2, recommendation 2. I wholeheartedly agree with that. And Councillor Pearce has demonstrated that obviously we're going to do that. I think what we need to do first, before we make any commitments moving forward about how we spend the BSIP money, is that we do this full review and deep delve consultation. And I agree with some of the comments that Councillor Field has said about joining the maps, putting everything together, knowing where exactly our services are. But going back to the franchising, after having conversations with Trent Barton to get into the understanding of what it would cost to run a bus service, I think the 5 current bus services that they run inside the city centre boundary cost the tune of between £2.5 million and £3 million a year. And that's not including any cross-boundary operations, and that doesn't even include any conversations that I've had with Arriva with their own internal boundary services, and obviously also their cross-boundary services. So for me, having a full franchise system, which I know Nottingham has, and they also have their issues around that. I mean, they have NET, which obviously is largely the transport system, which is hemorrhaging millions. And we look at the financial situation that Nottingham's finding ourselves in. So I agree that there is some hybrid work that can go on in here with this BSIP to try and combat some of the issues that we all face and all our communities are facing in relation to bus services. So I do have that element of nervousness, but bullet point 2 for me is once we've had that full review, that deep delve consultation that the Labour group are asking for, then it gives us the opportunity to see where we can move on from thereafter. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Smale. Are there any other speakers? Yeah, Councillor Hassel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I don't necessarily agree with the intent of this motion. I think there's a lot of good words and good wishes behind it. I think, as Councillor Peatfield has alluded to, it's a good opportunity to highlight the benefits of a combined authority that will give us the necessary geographical and financial influence and devolve powers from government that will enable us to enact a policy such as this. My point, I just want to raise on point 4, and it is a question that hopefully someone may answer, is that, and point 4, just for clarity, is to introduce methods that make bus journeys the easiest, quickest and most affordable way of travel. I would hope that that is not like a thinly veiled suggestion of road charging schemes or workplace parking levies without public consultation. And can they confirm they would support such a move? Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers before I ask Councillor Peatfield to sum up? Myself, I'm very much in sympathy with an awful lot of what is in this motion, but one point I would like you to address, Councillor Peatfield, is that last one, introduce methods that make bus journeys the easiest, quickest and most affordable way to travel. Well, some people think that's an easy way to do that is to make car travel more difficult. And I do hope that we can make bus travel easier without making car travel more difficult. I have very strong feelings about the ban on car use in Corporation Street, which if you want a plumber or a hairdresser or somebody who needs to drive for their work, and they're not a council officer who travels twice a day and works in an office or works from home, or you need a doctor or a midwife quickly, or an emergency vehicle. If we make our roads impossible to travel on by cars, it doesn't necessarily make bus travel easier. But I'm sure somebody will enlighten me on that. Councillor Peatfield, would you like to sum up?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There is nothing thinly veiled in any of this motion, so I can assure you of that, Councillor Hassel. Mr. Mayor, to address what you've asked, the simple reality is that we have to make the bus travel the most attractive option. And that's the long and the short of it. If that means that it's the cheaper option, the quicker option, and the most reliable option of getting to work, of getting around our city, that is what we need to do to get people out of their cars. So, to sum up, Mr. Mayor, I would have come on the bus, by the way, this evening, but they have been reduced, unfortunately, in the evenings, and I couldn't be sure that I would arrive to work on time. You refer to a public response and a consultation, and the response to the hastily concocted consultation that's currently online has been great online. However, the actual interaction with the consultation has not so far, because it is a 74-page technical document that the public has to wade through very dryly in order to understand the BSIP proposals, in order to answer the consultation questions. So if you're looking for interaction from the public on what they want, we're going to have to make it simpler for them to understand it, to read it in a much easier way so that they can comprehend it and compose their responses accordingly. I'm glad to hear that there will be scope for travel mapping and community needs. Absolutely very much welcomed, and of course part of the motion. But you referred to we will have a small influence on fares. Well, if that's the case, then BSIP is not the answer, is it? As I said, it's part of a solution, but it's not the complete answer. And perhaps, just perhaps, franchising is, because just a small influence on fares is not going to be enough to encourage people to be able to get on the bus instead of into their car. And of course, if we listen to the private companies and their opinion on franchises, I don't think we're going to get, you know, an honest and clear and balanced answer there. Councillor Pearce, you say that you hope we will have discussions ongoing from this, and of course, I welcome that. And I repeat, if Councillor Poulter had responded to my letter, we would have already had these conversations instead of perhaps having the motion. And of course, Councillor Pearce, if you do agree with some of the motions on some of the principles of the motion, then you were welcome to amend it. But I return to the intent of the motion, as Councillor Hassel has referred to, the intent of it, which he doesn't agree with. It asks that we, as a council, prioritise people over profit. We prioritise regular, affordable, accessible services. And I remind us in the council chamber this evening that we are in a partnership with this, but we can prioritise this ourselves and take it to the table. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Peatfield. Those in favour of the motion, please show. Those against, please show. That is carried with 24 and everybody else abstaining, so nobody opposed to it. The next item is 13, Local Government Pay Reward Award, to be moved by Councillor Shanker and seconded by Councillor Bonser. Councillor Shanker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This motion is about supporting our officers during these most difficult of times. And with your indulgence, Mr. Mayor, let me start by putting the current economic situation into context through the lens of somebody else. So forgive me, I've borrowed these words. The highest tax burden in 70 years, 12 years of low growth, 12 years of a stagnating economy, 12 years of broken promises. And yes, you've guessed right, these are the words of the current Foreign Secretary, possibly our next Prime Minister. One thing that I hope all 51 members can agree is that we have an abundance of the best people working here at this council. Officers that day in, day out give their best to support our city, our communities and our residents. Kind words of appreciation, even the occasional email praising their contribution and the return of an employee awards night are really important to help motivate and encourage. But one thing is absolutely clear. In the harsh realities after 12 years of austerity, the highest tax burden in 70 years and soaring inflation is that none of the above can be a replacement for being paid a decent wage for a decent job done. Research from our friends in Unison, whose members, along with other trade unions, represent so much of our workforce, shows that local government has endured huge central government funding cuts. The research found that councils in England alone had to fill a combined funding gap of £3 billion when setting budgets this financial year alone. As the motion states, Mr. Mayor, over the last 2 years, councils have led the way in efforts against the global COVID-19 pandemic, providing a huge range of services and support for our communities. Local government has shown more than ever how indispensable it is. Initiative after initiative announced by senior ministers, including this excuse of a Prime Minister who thankfully is on his way, ultimately delivered by our council officers like so many others across the UK. But COVID has led to a massive increase in expenditure and a loss of income. And as we emerge from the pandemic, local authorities and schools need far more support from Westminster, not less. Council and school workers kept our communities safe through the pandemic, often putting themselves at considerable risk as they work to protect public health provide quality housing, ensure our children continue to be educated and look after our older and more vulnerable people. Since 2010, Mr. Mayor, the local government workforce has endured years of pay restraint, with the majority of pay points losing 27.5% of their value since 2009-10. Staff are facing the worst cost of living crisis in a generation. The RPI forecast by the Office of Budget Responsibility shows an average of 9.8% across 2022. I know more figures have been released today, which shows an increase in inflation once again. Many staff are having to make impossible choices between food, heating and paying for other essentials. This is a terrible situation for anybody to find themselves in. Across the UK, Mr. Mayor, 900,000 jobs have been lost in local government since June 2010, a reduction of more than 30%. Local government has arguably been hit more severe with job losses than any other part of the public sector. Here in Derby, we had 4,954 employees in 2010. Anybody want to guess how many we have now? Less than 2,900. That's a huge 42% reduction. And if anybody thinks the workload has reduced by that much, they're just kidding themselves. There's been a disproportionate impact on women, with women making up more than 3/4 of our local government workforce. Recent research again shows that if government were to fully fund the union's 2022 pay claim, around half of that money would be recouped immediately, thanks to the increased taxes revenue, reduced expenditure on benefits and tax credits, and an increased consumer spending in the local economy. Our workers are public sector superheroes. They keep our communities clean and safe, look after those in need, and keep our towns and cities running. Without the professionalism and dedication of our staff, council services for our residents, council services that our residents rely on wouldn't be deliverable. Local government workers deserve a proper, real terms pay increase. The government needs to take responsibility and fund this increase. It should not be put on the burden of local authorities whose funding has been cut to the bone and were not offered adequate support through the COVID-19 pandemic. So, Mr. Mayor, let us all send a really strong message to the government and to the two last standing in the Tory race to become Prime Minister. Let's support this pay claim, submitted, yes, by Unison, GMB, Unite, on behalf of council workers and school workers, for an increase of £2,000 or RPI, whichever is greater. And it's a really important point, that, because we've got to protect those on the lowest incomes, and that's the only way of doing that. I'm sure Councillor Barker's going to get up in a second and have a pop at the unions and members of those unions. But let's just remember, those members are also our employees. Let's call on the Local Government Association to make urgent representations to central government to fund the NJC pay claim. Let's write to the Chancellor and the Secretary of State, whoever they may be this week, to call for a pay increase for local government workers to be funded with new money from central government. Meet with local NJC union representatives to convey support for the pay claim and consider practical ways in which the council can support this campaign. Let's encourage all local government unions, all local government workers to join trade unions. Let's not try and amend this sensible motion. Put your amendments away, please. Let's not try and shift the blame. Let's not say we can't do anything about this. Let's stand with the women and men who make this council tick, We support the residents that elect us. Let's do the right thing and support this motion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Bonser, do you wish to speak now or reserve your right to speak later?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to speak now, if that's okay. I'm very happy to second this motion brought to us by the recognised NJC joint unions Unison, Unite and the GMB. Thank you, Councillor Shanker, for proposing this motion, and I also hope that there will be no call for a long debate or any amendment to this motion. I believe we should be pushing against an open door. As councillors across all parties, we recognise the work of officers and all of our council colleagues on a regular basis, and particularly during the past couple of years. Right now, I believe that we need to proactively support their pay claim, and this motion gives us that opportunity now. We know that under this government, local government funding has been reduced, and that is why we are calling for the council to request a fully funded offer. And let's ensure that Derby City Council employees, our colleagues, are not plunged into work poverty this year as a result of the cost of living crisis. I want to tell you about a colleague who is personally known to me, and I'm going to call her Kate, but her name isn't Kate. She works in a Derby school. She's actually on the 5th grade in the Derby City Council pay scale on grade E, but she's only paid for term time. She lives alone, she's got grown-up children, and she takes home just £1,304 a month. Now, it doesn't take a mathematician to work out that when she's paid her rent at £650 a month, her fuel at £100 a month, water rates and council tax, £45 and £80 a month respectively, and energy now at a whopping £193 a month. Her TV licence, car tax, her insurance for her car accounts for another £73. We're already at £1,141. That's leaving very little for food, clothing, mobile and entertainment, possibly, not to mention anything else. And imagine if this person had children too. Full-time council house colleagues on the lower bands are in a similar situation. Kate counts herself as lucky. She's what's called a level 2 teaching assistant, and there are many level 1 teaching assistants at her school who are paid 2 grades lower. And many, many council employees paid on grades A, B, C and D. Kate is a grade E, remember. It just doesn't add up. Kate says to me that she dreads resorting to food banks, but she can see it happening. She is using her credit card with no means of paying it off, and she tells me that she may stop contributing to the local government pension scheme to increase her take-home pay. NJC staff need a pay rise now, not a below inflation percentage of an already eroded wage, not a one-off payment, a bribe, to put up and shut up for now, but real pounds in their pockets and the dignity of a realistic wage for a job well done. Our staff deserve better and they need to hear our support. It's the very, very least that we can do. So are you prepared to do as the motion requests and appeal for central funding for this pay round, or are you going to turn your back on Kate and our other colleagues and tell them that they're not worthy? Please support this motion. It is our chance as leaders to send a message of support to staff who work so hard for the people of Derby day in and day out. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bonser. Councillor Barker.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry, Councillor Shanker, you're going to be very disappointed because far from, in actual fact, castigating the unions, I'm from that stock. You probably can't remember that, but I am. And as one of my other jobs outside of this Derby City, I am the Vice Chair of East Midlands Council's Employers Authority Board. And so therefore I was aware back in March from the national employers of local government services that there would be a pay claim coming from the unions. Bearing in mind that the national agreement that we abide by within Derby City is all our information goes through East Midlands councils, and from there it is dissipated up to the employers board, who do the negotiation on a national basis. And so therefore on the 6th of June this year I received an early copy of both the NJC pay claim and also the JNC pay claim, which is the more senior officers. I immediately got hold of EMC over in Mount Mowbray, and we formed what was the first Regional Employers Board on the 9th of June. 3 days, just 3 days after the pay claims had been received. Now, I don't want to teach people to suck eggs, but had you have been to the Employers Board previously, and when you was previously in this position, you would know that that in actual fact not only is the unitary authorities within the East Midlands, it is also the boroughs, the districts, the parish councils. Everybody is involved in that meeting. And not only are they involved, but also the unions. And so therefore, as per usual, Unison, GMB and Unite were at that meeting as well. And so therefore we discussed the pay claim that had been laid on the table 3 days earlier, and we came out with a empathy in relation to the reduction in the value of the pay of local employees compared with private sector over this past few years, when yes, it has been restricted. But we also took into account, which you've not mentioned, the fact that the national living wage is also catching up with our pay scales, and that therefore would have to be looked at as well. And we also looked at, on top of that, the fact that the transport and the mileage allowance, which has been in place since 2012, has never gone up from 45 pence. And some of our lowest paid workers who have to use their vehicles in the course of their work are now suffering because of the price of fuels, quite considerably because of that figure being stuck. That's nothing to do with JCC or anything like that, but we have written a letter to HMRC asking for an increase in that. So therefore, hopefully, our workforce will appreciate that. Right, carrying on from there, on the 21st of June, we formulated, or East Midlands Councillors formulated a formal pay consultation group. At that, I was joined by Alison Parkin from Finance and Liz Moore from our HR department. Again, at that meeting, there was consensus across the board from all the councils, never mind what political party they were. There was consensus across the board that this was a crunch time for local authorities. There were tales of retention, and there was tales of jobs going to private sector because of the pay restraints and so forth. And it was debated at that, and we sent letters, or it was debated from there, that all local authorities would send letters to their MPs. The East Midlands councils would send letters to the LGA as well, and also to Parliament, seeking a reasonable pay settlement for all of the staff right across the board, and seeking some compensation to our grant in relation to paying for that over and above what would be the normal 1 or 2%. So that's been done. We next went to the LGA meeting over in Harrogate. One of your representatives was there, as was a Liberal Democrat.
Councillor Barker, you were well over the 5 minutes.
Well, I know, but it's very important.
I agree, and I'm going to be tolerant. I just want you to...
Yeah.
Round up.
Well, okay, then LGA, James Jameson again raised the issue there, so therefore the LGA's got it in hand. There was an LGA meeting last week when, again, the LGA chair with East Midlands Councils again said that it was in the hands of their officials and they were looking at government. The matter is being put forward. It's not just a matter of the national living wage, it is the pay claims right across the board. We are doing exactly what we can. Everything you have asked of here has already been done and is being done, and so therefore, whilst most of my colleagues in Derby and the unions in Derby know of this, it's a shame that you didn't ask them beforehand what we've done about it. And because they are fully aware of exactly where we stand, and I would hope that you would draw this motion because it has been done already. Sorry about that, Mr. Mayor.
Right. Do you mean that rhetorically, or are you actually asking? Well, I've got all right. I've got Councillor Skelton, Councillor Dinser, Councillor Hesgrave, and Councillor Smale all want to speak, but I will just ask Councillor Shanker if he wishes to withdraw the motion.
Absolutely not, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, let's carry on then. Councillor Skelton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think sort of adding to what has been already said, looking at the sort of broader jobs market that is out there at the moment, we are in a situation where there are shortages of workers, and obviously we hear every day on the news about pay increasing within the private sector, while there are not all staff groups within any local authority have got sort of opportunities to directly go into the private sector. There are quite a number that do have, and others of course could retrain and do something else in the private sector. So it is quite right that we do need to really push the point with government that, you know, if we don't do something now, there will be people exiting council employment across the country, not just in Derby, and we will be left with severe problems. So, you know, it is very important that this matter is addressed. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Dinser.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I'm glad to hear finally that Councillor Barker agrees with the resolution and is doing whatever he can, and I hope the whole of the Conservative group are doing whatever they can to make sure the resolution has identified here is progressed and supported wholeheartedly. So I hope that we will get unanimous support around the chamber here in terms of supporting this motion, because we know, all of us, and as Councillor Barker, you know, agrees, that our workforce, our officers in this city, like many local authority public servants, have worked tirelessly, courageously to deliver the services to many vulnerable, deprived, isolated communities across Derby beyond the call of duty, despite 10 years or more of reduction and cuts in their salaries, their incomes, and increases in their workloads because of reductions in workforce. The least they deserve is to get a fair pay increase, recognised not only in words, which we've all thanked our workforce in terms of the council, how wonderful they've been, how courageous and selfless they've been in serving the people of Derby. Words and themselves are not enough. We need to back this up with support, and most importantly, the most important bit in this resolution for me is that central government has continued to take the credit for any increases that have happened for public servants in the past, but then put the pressure and the onus on local authorities like ourselves to make cuts or find some ways of funding those increases. That cannot continue to happen. We cannot continue to put more burden on our finances and budgets at a local level. So this resolution is wanting to make sure that we do whatever we can, using all the mechanisms suggested in this resolution to deliver for the people who are working for us in this council, and deliver for those who are being challenged by the cost of living crisis that is engulfing majorities of our communities. So, Councillor Barker, thanks for the efforts that you described. Thank you for saying that what the resolution is saying is right and we should pursue this. Let's finish this by supporting this resolution to continue to make the best result for our workforce now and in the future.
Councillor Hazelgrave.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Last year's pay negotiations don't bode well for this year's. The last local government employees pay award was lamentably late, coming at the final stages of the last financial year. The award was made so late that the LGA advised councils that if any employee leaving service in the last financial year asked for back pay, that this should be granted. There was no onus put on the councils by the LGA to instruct payroll to automatically effect payment of back pay. I would hope that this council went the extra mile and did this anyway, as the money in question was not theirs but former employees. This top-down approach by the LGA is symptomatic of the whole attitudes towards employees, particularly at the bottom of the hierarchy, who largely are most in need of any pay rise. Council would do well, as set out in this motion, to write to the Chancellor and relevant Secretary of State to provide new money to find a realistic and timely pay increase in these inexorably challenging times. Morale amongst local government employees will be even lower, I'm sure, as we find out today the two sides of the same Tory counterfeit coin that are revealed as the putative new Prime Minister. Our Conservative councillors, who of course will choose between the two last runners in this contest, if they choose to vote, and they can at least cast a vote in this debate this evening to seek a change of heart from whoever the new Prime Minister and Cabinet will be.
Councillor Hazelgrave, can you please keep to the motion and not discuss the election of the Prime Minister? That is a quite separate thing. It's getting quite late, and I'd be grateful if you could...
Mr Mayor, I don't have a vote in that.
I do.
And at least cast a vote in this debate to seek a change of heart from whoever the new PM and Cabinet will be in this matter. And I urge all councillors to support this motion.
Councillor Smale.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. I don't think no one's disagreeing with what the hard work that our local government employees have done in the last 2 years. It's been incredible to all come together at such challenging times in being able to deliver effective services under difficult pressures. Councillor Barker has obviously explained quite diligently about what the work is going on. And just to put in context, I don't think no one disagrees with the hard work that they've done, and that a meaningful and effective pay rise is needed for our local government workers. But I do have to caveat that the cost of this, for example, for 1% increase would have cost us £1.2 million. Now, obviously, we've already put money to side on that, but for a 10% pay rise, or preferably around 2,000, will cost us to the tune of 12 million. So absolutely right, we do need new money, because there's no way that this council would be able to sustain that kind of pay increase. So they're of course Councillor Barker's already said that the work's going on with East Midland Councils, LGA, obviously lobbying our own MPs and the Secretary of State, and that will continue to do so because we will need to allocate new money to actually implement any of the new pay increases. So there is, I think there is a general good feeling across all of us that we do need to have some form of substantial funding coming forward from central government that doesn't put the burden on local authorities. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I support this motion and I do urge all other councillors to back it. I do have a few words to say. I hope you won't chop me down because I do think my comments relate precisely to the question of lobbying and what Councillor Smale has just said. Because after all, Conservative councillors are in a strong position right now to influence government policy. As Conservative Party members, they'll soon be voting for yet another Prime Minister, part of a select group, we understand, about of 160,000 members, that's it, in the country. So what I would say is that instead of dwelling on an age-old Conservative existential dilemma to cut or not cut taxes, they could ask candidates about other issues. They could ask, why should local government workers pay, yet again, for Conservative economic mismanagement? Haven't the cuts to local government gone far enough? Could they have coped with losing over 25% of the value of their own income since 2010? Didn't local government workers do enough to prove their worth during the pandemic? How can recruitment to key areas, such as social care, improve when pay is so low? What more do the government expect from local government workers who are holding key services together? Now, no doubt some will say that increasing pay only exacerbates inflationary pressures, and inflation is at a 40-year high. But this inflation we're seeing now, it's not caused by high wages or economic growth. It's caused by escalating costs in fuel, energy and food. And all of that was foreseeable, for which Sunak and the rest were unprepared and about which they have done very little. Why should, therefore, local government workers pay, yet again, for this Conservative economic mess? Instead of token gestures, a bit of money here, handouts there, Conservative councillors, and I asked them to, quite genuinely, because I know they're not running the government, but I asked them to ask their candidates, will you deliver a fair deal for local authorities and local authority workers and fund the pay award as requested? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Poulter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I just say in the outset of this, that be in no doubt that the Conservative group on this council are 100% behind our employees and grateful and appreciate the work that they've done over an extended period of very troublesome conditions, and be absolutely clear that, as Councillor Barker has already told us, that he has been and will continue to do and are doing everything we can to encourage government to recognise that effort put in by our local council employees, and absolutely endorse the need for central government to recognise that and to fund the appropriate level of pay rises for our staff. And Councillor Barker couldn't be any more clear that that's our intention. It has been and will be our intention to press government on this subject. Being as we're talking Prime Ministerial candidates, I'm going tomorrow morning to the LGA in London. There is a hustings with the last two candidates, and if I get the opportunity to address this exact issue with them, I intend to do so. But be assured that the following meeting is the advisory board to the local authority board, at which I am the East Midlands representative, and I will be raising this subject with the LGA tomorrow morning. So just to give that reassurance, really, that employees, the one main concerning one for me is the last sentence, and it implies that every employee of the City Council should be a union member. Well, you know the Conservative policy on that, and I don't stray from that, but I would point out that on induction, employees are encouraged and advised as to the services, potential services of the union, and given every opportunity to join. And I think that that should be the appropriate steps to take. So it's regrettable, but on the basis that we have been and will continue to do exactly what's in this motion, it's superfluous to the efforts that we're making, and we find that we're unable to support it on those terms. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Poulter. Councillor Peatfield.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will be very, very brief indeed. I'm afraid that trust in the word of the Conservatives is at an all-time low, so I really only have one word to say to anybody who works for the council, and that is #join a union.
I remind you of the councillor's code of conduct, which brings us to Councillor Shanker to sum up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Let me just try quickly addressing the three contributions from the Conservative groups. Councillor Smale first, I suppose. Read the motion, Councillor Smale. It clearly says in there that the call is for government to fund this, so trying to tell us how much it's going to cost us on our council tax or our revenue budget. That's not what this motion's about. But, you know, on the ball as always. So thank you, Councillor Smale, for your contribution. Councillor Barker. Now, that was quite interesting, because you told us about the details of your talks. You told us the dates of your talks. You told us about the people who you've had your talks with. And I thought for a minute you were going to actually do the right thing and support the motion. And then you completely, let alone voting against it or trying to amend it or do anything else, you ask us to withdraw it. What a pathetic response. And then, as I expect, can I finish, Councillor Barker? Mr. Mayor, do you want to? You're not listening there. Mr. Mayor? Mr. Mayor? Thank you. So, for Councillor Barker to talk about his talks, that's about all he's doing. What that won't do is help the employees who are getting more and more desperate by the day. And Councillor Barker, where did Councillor Barker go? Appropriate level, he said. We deserve a pay rise, but at an appropriate level. Councillor Barker's was a reasonable pay rise. Again, read the motion. We're asking for RPI or £2,000. Let's really be specific. Let's say what we want, rather than trying to hide away and talking about being reasonable, being appropriate. That's not going to pay the bills. So, Mr. Mayor, can we have a recorded vote on this motion, please?
We need 10 people to stand up, please. I think we've got 10 there. Yep.
See what you do.
Last union strike was under a Labour government. The TAs did well job there.
Good.
I'll hand over to Alex to take the vote.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When I read councillors' names, will they indicate whether they are for or against the motion as it is set out in the agenda, please? Firstly, Councillor Atwell.
For.
Councillor Barker.
Already done. Abstain.
Councillor Bonser.
For.
Councillor Kerr.
For.
Councillor Carr. Councillor Cooper. Councillor Dinser.
For.
Councillor Evans?
Abstain.
Councillor Eyre? Councillor Froggatt has left the meeting. Councillor Graves has given his apologies. Councillor Hassel, please. Councillor Hesselgrave? Councillor Alison Holmes? Councillor Matthew Holmes? Councillor Hussain? Councillor Ingle is no longer here. Councillor Jennings, please. Councillor Jangir Khan? Councillor Shiraz Khan? Councillor Kuss? Councillor Lind?
For.
Councillor Lindsay? Councillor Lonsdale?
For.
Councillor Martin?
For.
Councillor Nater?
For.
Councillor Nawaz? Councillor Pandy? Right. Councillor Patterson? Councillor Jerry Pearce? Councillor Tracy Pearce? Councillor Peatfield?
Join a union. 4.
Councillor Potter? Councillor Poulter? Councillor Prosser? Councillor Rawson? Councillor Repton? Councillor Rawson has given her apologies. Councillor Sandu? Councillor Shanker?
4.
Councillor Skelton?
4.
Councillor Smale? Councillor Swan? Councillor Testro? Councillor Webb?
Abstain.
Councillor West?
4.
Councillor Whitby? Councillor Williams has left the meeting, and the Mayor, Councillor Wood, please. Motion is carried, 24 in favour, 0 against.
For, 0 against, 23 abstained. But the motion is carried. The motion is carried. The next item is item 14, ambulance response times, to be moved by Councillor Lonsdale and seconded by Councillor Lind. Councillor Lonsdale has informed us of our intention to alter, that's not amend, alter the motion. This requires the consent of the meeting under CP 53 and will be signalled without debate.
It's to circulate.
Which is going to be circulated. Okay. Yeah. Councillor Lonsdale, would you like to explain what you're actually altering?
Okay, so the alterations, sorry, thank you, Mr. Mayor. The alteration is basically to add updated statistics to the motion and to clear up some of the language which may have been a bit confusing. It hasn't changed the motion at the core.
So really it's a clarification, it doesn't change the intent of the motion. Can I call on you then to move the motion as altered?
Pardon? So can I move the motion, please? Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Mr. Mayor. The paramedics of our NHS are outstanding people. They go above and beyond to help others. I am, as I am sure everyone will echo, so grateful to them. Recently I had cause to call an ambulance to help a gentleman who had fallen off his bike and had a serious head injury. Fortunately for me and the other kind people who had stopped to help him, off-duty paramedic happened to be passing and took over the scene. The off-duty paramedic, said that it was safer just for the family of the gentleman in question to take him straight to A&E and cancel the ambulance, because on that day there was a 6-hour plus waiting time for an ambulance for somebody who had lost consciousness and had a serious head injury. So I don't know what the end of that story was. You never do you, when you've done first aid? But the ambulance service is facing a nightmare scenario. It is not physically possible for them to meet the need of the population of the country, let alone our city of Derby. Since submitting the motion to the council to support the ambulance service and ask for more help, the issue has not been out of the news, with a black alert being announced for the entire country, but for our people in Derby. A black alert for the whole country on account of rising cases of COVID and the heat wave, and on top of all the normal pressures on the service. After all, people don't stop getting ill because of heat waves and COVID. They still get ill and they still have accidents. As you can see from the updated stats, East Midlands for Category 2 in June 22, waiting time was 1 hour and 12 minutes. It should be 18 minutes. People who otherwise could live are likely to die under these circumstances, and due to systematic underfunding of the NHS, due to doctors and nurses being unable to discharge patients to an overstretched social care system, causing a chain of events leading to that 6+ hours wait on that Saturday afternoon. And then, on top of that, long waits at hospital doors. You know, imagine finally waiting and finally getting the help you need, and then getting to the sanctuary of a hospital and not even being allowed over the threshold. This motion is not a criticism of the hard work being done by the NHS or the ambulance service. It's asking for more help. It's asking for them to tell us what they need for us to do to help them. Please support the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Lind, do you wish to speak now, or?
Yes, I'd like to speak now.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm happy to second this motion. We, the Liberal Democrats, are calling for urgent action to end the ambulance crisis in Derby. Ambulance staff, like NHS and health workers in Derby, do an amazing job, working tirelessly to keep us all safe every day of the year, and for that, we extend our heartfelt thanks and gratitude. It is not right that local people suffering medical emergencies, such as strokes and heart attacks, have to wait over an hour for medical help. The Conservative government has run our ambulance services into the ground, having taken Derby for granted for decades. And now we're seeing local patients and families pay the price. The government has ignored several warnings that services are at breaking point. In late 2021, ambulance waiting times were at their highest since records began, and now they are even higher than that, with a black alert having been declared. The government needs to step up and stop taking our area for granted. Health service waiting times across the board are struggling. Our local health staff are under immense pressure, and it looks like things are getting even worse. The Conservatives must take responsibility for leaving ambulance services underfunded and understaffed. We in the Liberal Democrats are calling for an urgent care quality commission investigation into the causes of ambulance delays, so urgent improvements can be made, and for better reporting of ambulance response times here in Derby. Years of Conservative cuts and neglect have left many patients waiting for hours for help in an emergency. Locally, people were forced to wait an average of 1 hour, 12 minutes for an ambulance to help with serious incidents like strokes and heart attacks. These shocking figures show too many people, are being left stranded waiting for an ambulance to arrive, waiting in pain and distress for the medical care they need. Ambulance services in Derby are being stretched to breaking point. People are being let down by a Conservative government that is sitting on its hands, whilst lives are being put at risk due to their incompetence. Therefore, I also call on all of you to support this motion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move an amendment, please.
Thank you. Is it seconded? Councillor Repton seconding. Thank you. Circulated. Not it yet. Certainly I haven't. Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Martin, would you like to move your amendment?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to thank Councillor Lonsdale for bringing this motion to full council this evening, and we very much support the motion for the important issue it raises. Ambulance response times have become totally unacceptable and are putting lives at risk. We also pay tribute to ambulance staff who are working as sticking plasters in a broken NHS. However, I'm proposing this amendment in order to strengthen the motion, which focuses more on promoting the issue and less, in my opinion, on addressing it. We already have numerous reports from independent bodies such as the Healthcare Safety Investigation Board and the Nuffield Trust, which have analysed the causes of lengthening ambulance response times. We don't need extensive further investigation. From 2010 onwards, the NHS has been underfunded year on year. The complex Conservative restructuring of the NHS in 2012 meant managing it and holding it to account became even more difficult. Mismanagement has meant a dearth of planning in key areas, not least staffing. So we have a shortage of GPs and inadequate out-of-hours care. So more people are not getting the medical attention they need, and very often they end up calling an ambulance. Another problem is ambulances left queuing outside hospitals, unable to transfer a patient from the ambulance into A&E. This wait can take hours, and sometimes staff spend the bulk of their shift, their 12-hour shift, just sitting in an ambulance outside A&E. This all costs and wastes millions, and much of it is due to blockages in the hospital system. In the last month, the Royal Derby has had the equivalent of 6 wards of patients waiting to be discharged. And those long delays are caused largely by a lack of social care staff to facilitate discharge arrangements. And on top of that, I understand, I've just been told this evening that today the Royal Derby had to call a critical incident because they simply could not cope with the number of people going to A&E, and I understand that happened today. So this amendment focuses not on asking an already stretched service to produce more data, but on action to deal with the problem. We urge that NHS and social care funding is increased. And also, as it says in the amendment, in consultation with the local integrated care board, we want that funding to be allocated appropriately to those services where staffing and funding shortages are contributing to unacceptable and dangerous ambulance response times. And that would mean increasing funding also to GPs and social care services. So I thank you for that, and I ask Council to support this amendment.
And I understand, Councillor Dinser, you are seconding this amendment. Do you wish to speak now or reserve your right?
I'll reserve my right to speak later, Chair.
Are there any other speakers on the amendment? Councillor Skelton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm speaking against accepting this amendment because I feel it takes the guts out of the motion. You do need good information in order to be able to diagnose where the issues are, and then to be able to direct the funding to the right place. So I think it is important that we actually support this piece of legislation that at the moment is going through Parliament. So I think that we do need to do that, otherwise we don't actually get the information that we need. So I think it is important that we do support it, and that also the Secretary of State, we do request that the CQC then actually do conduct an urgent investigation into the causes and the impacts of these delays, because if they don't and we don't get the answers to that, we don't actually then have any basis on which to properly create solutions to those problems. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Dinser, would you like to second now?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry, I was finding it difficult to hear Councillor Skelton's comments. I mean, I think the amendment proposed by Councillor Martin focuses on what we need to know. Response times, everybody is aware that Category 1, Category 2 response times for ambulances are woefully off the required standard. And there are many examples in the East Midlands and beyond where ambulances are queuing up in our hospital emergency services, and the reality is that the funding for social care in particular is causing many of the problems which are faced by ambulance staff who are waiting either outside hospitals, and we've all seen the queues and the bus, the ambulances queuing up and going further and further out, and being there not just for 45 minutes on average, sometimes for 12, 14 hours and even longer. And the traumatic experience of many people living in East Midlands, in Derby and beyond. So the reality is, counting and getting more detail on response times may help to inform what we already know. The fact is, we need the appropriate resources targeted at the appropriate places, which is for the ambulance services, for the health emergency services, and for social care. The reality is, the funding for social care is clogging up the whole system. And this amendment is going to the heart of what's required, not a bill which has been promoted by a Liberal Democrat MP for counting something that we already know about. So I hope that we can all agree that we love our health and social care service. We want it to do the best for the people who find themselves in need of these services. And we want to add to the efforts already being made by many health and social care workers and ambulance workers across the country and in the East Midlands to deliver the best service they can. They are hampered by lack of funding. Lack of funding which we all recognise is needed. The government recognises we need it. The National Insurance Levy. However, we know that much of the funding which is being identified is not reaching the parts it needs to. We need to put our effort and our voice, and this amendment does that, to say to central government, let's have the targeted additional funding to make our services for our most vulnerable and the most needy at their critical times, many facing life-threatening experiences, to get the best service. And this amendment enables us to get to the heart of that now, rather than getting more information and data which will only confirm what we know already. Response times by ambulances are woefully off target, and that is because of factors about funding, resources, and targeted blockage of barriers and hurdles for our NHS and social care staff. So I would urge the Liberal Democrats to consider the focus of what we want to do and immediately try to get the message across to the right place, to the government, to provide more funding for our health and social care and ambulance services in the East Midlands, and therefore benefit Derby and beyond. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Those in favour of the amendment, please show. Fourteen. Those against, please show. That amendment is lost.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Some of the reasons around the ambulance service in the East Midlands, I mean, it is an East Midlands ambulance service, and some of the challenges around that service are quite easy to see. The biggest reason for the long handovers is the breakdown of patient flow. That's not a funding issue, that's a management issue. And patient flow through the hospital from A&E through to discharge, and we can be proud of our discharge service in Derby, because it's not only good for us, but it was nationally recognised, our hospital to home service. And prior to COVID, delayed discharge, that was something we hadn't heard of in Derby, but it is an issue around some of our adjoining boroughs and districts. The biggest challenge again around discharge is the domiciliary care that is not quite out there in the numbers that we would like. But Joined Up Care Derbyshire, the integrated care system and local government are working together to try and remove this blockage, because it's not one part of the system that is causing the problem. It's not the ambulance service that's causing the problem, and that's the indication in the motion. The issues around this is a system issue, and it is the whole system that needs looking at. And it's very unfair to state that Derby City Council has failed to act on warnings that ambulance services are struggling to maintain a safe safe and timely service. The system, this is a system challenge and not one that the council or indeed any other organisation can resolve in isolation. So that's why the work is being done within Joined Up Care Derbyshire and the integrated care system. The failure of government, I can say that the government have challenged the hospital systems and local government with a 100-day discharge, fully funded so that we can get people out of hospital effectively. So what I would like to do now is to move an amendment to this motion.
Is there a seconder to the amendment? Thank you. Councillor Poulter.
Yeah, it does. No.
So
that's... it starts again.
I'm telling you.
Councillor Webb, you have precisely 30 seconds to... 50 seconds to move your amendment or hand it over to somebody who's got another 5 minutes. All right?
Okay, so as written here, instead of instructing the Chief Executive, we are asking the Chief Executive and Strategic Director of People Services to continue to work with partners to improve the ambulance response times, and to note that councillors have the opportunity to put any item on any scrutiny agenda if they wish to do so with the consent of the chair. So I move the amendment as printed. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Poulter, do you wish to speak to the amendment at this point or reserve your right to do so?
I'll speak a little bit now. Just to expand a little bit on the side of the amendment in terms of the changes, and they're centred around the fact that Derby has a good reputation in relation to getting people out of hospital and things like that, but we absolutely recognise the pressures on the ambulance service as of now. But the fact is that the amendment as put forward is flawed in a number of ways, particularly the need or the recommendation that council recommends to the chair of the scrutiny board that they look at this issue. It's not for the council to dictate or decide or pressure the chair of the scrutiny board to do anything. And as the amendment points out, any one member of the council can make that recommendation, but ultimately it's at the behest of the chair of the scrutiny committee, who will decide whether to take it as a project or a topic or to do anything with it. So it's not for the council to force them to do so. And the other one is really in relation to forcing, or I don't forget the wording, but you can't direct and force the chief executive to do anything in relation to this. So the amendment clarifies the position in relation to what the council as a whole can recommend to the chief executive and the director of people services to continue to work with partners on improvement plans. So that's the thrust of the amendment, is that most of these things are being done, and there's a couple of things in there that aren't procedurally right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor. The Liberal Democrat group have just requested if we could include the stats from the proposed amendment right at the beginning that Councillor Lonsdale did, and we're happy to accept that as a group as well.
Yes.
The stats.
Sorry, just to clarify, the alteration that Councillor Lonsdale moved at the start of the meeting is incorporated in the wording of Councillor Webb's amendment already?
Already?
Yeah.
No, it's not. Not. Stats are wrong. If you just need to update stats.
Sorry, we'll clarify that point. It was based on the one that was originally published, but we've got, obviously, the alteration has now been carried, so we can incorporate that in the amendment, if that makes sense.
Can we vote on the amendment? Those in favour of the amendment, please show. Anybody against? So it's amended. We now return then to the substantive motion as amended. Is there anybody who wishes to speak before I ask Councillor Lonsdale to sum up if she wishes to do so? Councillor Lonsdale, do you wish to add anything?
I think, Mr. Mayor, we shall go to the vote.
Those in favour of the motion, the substantive motion as amended, please show.
Oh, yes, no, yes, no, yes. Think about it.
Hashtag well done, Peggy.
That motion, as amended, is carried. We've had somebody in the chamber this evening doing work experience very quietly in one corner, and I haven't drawn attention to her. I don't think she's voted in any of the votes, but we wish her well, and if this hasn't put her off local government, she has a very good career ahead of her. That brings the business of today's meetings to a close. Thank you for your participation, and to all those watching online. We'll see you again in September. Councillor Barker. Wait a
Mr.
minute.
Mayor, can I just say before we go that thank you to Derby Live for videoing this tonight, but next time can the cameraman shift his camera up a bit? Of course, all he gets is my belly.
Be on the roof. Nobody watches anyway.
It's the biggest part of your body.